Oh, come on.
Dude, no creepy laughing in the middle of the meeting. What the heck?
All right. Tonight we're talking about film soundtracks. I think last week we were talking about composing, and now we're talking about the soundtrack. If you're getting either licensed music or copyright free music or something like that, and trying to fit it to your film, and we're talking a little bit more about that kind of stuff. So when you're editing music to your film, you want to make sure you're thinking about your scene in terms of like small little sections instead of like the whole entire scene. If you just try to overlay an entire scene with music, it's just going to sound like background music or like elevator music. And that's usually not what you want. You want it to sound, you want it to flow with the story. You want it to still go, even though it wasn't made exactly for your film, you want to try to match it as best you can. So you don't just want to overlay a soundtrack or a song or some instrumental behind your scene and just let it flow the entire time, unless you get super lucky and it works for what you want. Usually you want to try to like break it down into small emotional sections in the film, or what is happening in the scene. Is action picking up? Is action slowing down? Is there an emotional moment? Those kinds of things are going to should make you want to change the way you're putting the song into place, where you're leaving little breaks. Maybe there's no music in this part, but then the music starts ramping up here. And you can really take a song and start breaking it down, especially if you have the layers of the different instruments within those songs, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you really just want to match it to the scene. And so doing it in sections, doing it in little tiny beats of like character moments or what's happening on screen, or is there a surprise all of a sudden, or is there nothing really happening, so it's just a slow fade, or what's happening to make it match the story. And you really want to think about that when you're putting licensed music or already created music into your film, so that you can try to match it.
Makes sense.
You also want to know who's telling the story and whose point of view we are seeing it from. Depending on that, it's going to change the music choices. If we look at this picture in the top left, are we watching this film from the guy in the left screen left, or are we watching it from the guy's point of view in screen right? Those two are going to be very different. That guy's holding a gun to his head. Are we worried about that guy, or are we on the side with the guy on the left? Those two things are going to make the music be extremely different, because one is, in a very scared moment, and the other one is in a he's about to, kill that guy, or he's just threatening him, or whatever's going on through his head is going to be very different than what's going on through the other guy's head who has a gun pointed to his head. So the tone of the music and
a good example that he showed, like even though I thought the song was a tad on the overdramatic side, an example that he showed was like two people in bed, and one's like trying to get the person's attention and the other person's upset or something. And you have to figure out, who are we in the scene? Are we the guy or are we the girl? And that will help you know which emotion to portray them, like which dominant emotion to portray.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it was like there was a girl and there was a guy, and the girl was a little upset looking, but the guy didn't really notice because he was just waking up. So who are we seeing the movie from? Who are we? Who's telling that story that we're watching? They chose that the woman was telling the story, and so they played a more somber tone, a more somber song to make it match with the emotion that she was feeling compared to what the guy was feeling when he wasn't really knowing what was going on. He wasn't expecting her to be sad. So just keep that in mind whenever you're putting any kind of music into your project. You want to think about it like a composition, and you want to try to treat it like a composition and match it as best you can.
That makes sense.
You also don't want to just use the music to fill in the gaps. You want to let it shape the story. You don't just want to have music be there to be there. Sometimes it's even better to have no music at all. Sometimes in a horror film, you'll have the most tension when there's no sound, or when there's only sound but no music. And so you don't just want to put music everywhere just to have music there. You want it to mean something, and you want it to bring the emotional or the tone of the film to the audience. You want to build things up or simmer things down, or, you know, all sorts of different things that you can do with the music. Now, to get permission for using a licensed song, you can either use a website that has stock music like Premium Beats, Ben Sound. There's a bunch of different ones that you can use that have like stock sound music that you pay a fee for. Either you pay it individually per song, or you subscribe to the website and you get access to all of their music, and you can choose what you want to do, or you get like a certain number of songs that you can download per month to use in your projects. So different sites do different things, but you can either get access to their licenses that way, and that way you can get the copyright by paying for their subscription service, and you'll get it through their website. Or you will have to, let me see. So the other way you're gonna have to do it is, if you're trying to get a specific song, you're gonna need to find out who owns that copyright. You're gonna need to submit a request to them for like how you're gonna use it, what you're gonna use it in, how long it's gonna be in there, and what you're trying to submit that project to. Is it gonna be in theaters? Is it gonna be on TV? Like, where is it gonna go? And how many people are you expecting to see it? Those kinds of things are gonna need to be requested.
Before we continue with that, one thing that you didn't mention, that I was waiting to see when I would mention, if I was to mention it, is one thing that they also brought up as far as like using using sounds that you purchase, like using scores that you purchase, is that you don't have to necessarily follow the entire song exactly. Like, you can cut parts out and just put the parts that you think sound like they match the most to the melody. For example, like we saw someone breaking it down, and he removed parts because he was like, oh, these horns don't match this tone, so I'm going to remove the horns from the song, but I'm going to keep the rest. I'm going to remove this specific part of the song, and the rest still works. Or I'm going to chop this bit and put it here, stuff like that. So that's,
yeah, depending on the website, it'll be layered. It won't just give you the final master. It'll give you the final master with all the different layers, the instruments that are within that, within the song or within the instrumental. So you can always take out what you don't like or change it. But certain things, sometimes you're only going to get the final master, where all you have to work with is the final mixing of the song, where you don't have access to all the different instruments. So then you'll have to work a little bit more with the song as it is. And the other way will give you a lot more control. So if you do have the ability to get a layered one that has all the different instruments, and you can edit them and change them up and take them out, do whatever you want with them, that can change the song and make you have kind of a unique sound anyway. But it can also help you to match it exactly how you'd want if you don't like something like the horns, or if you don't like, I don't want the guitar in here, but I really like the drums, or I really like the way, the violin is working in this piece, but everything else isn't working for this. So I'm going to take everything except for the violin and just leave the violin as it is. Something like that, like Priscilla was saying. And that way you can really adapt it and change it to kind of sounding unique, but also matching your story the best way you want. So back to like, if you need to get a specific song, like if you were trying to get a song that you've heard, even if it's like an independent band, if they have a publisher, you're gonna have to do a few steps to get access to that song and to be able to use it. You'll have to submit a request saying what you're going to use it for and how long it's going to be in the project, what the project is, different things like that. I'm not sure exactly, but I think a lot of them request to see what they're going to be put in, so that they can see if they want to be associated with that or not. So it just depends on where you're trying to get it, how high of a budget you have, and how big of a song you're trying to get. But you'll have to submit a request to whoever owns it. wait for approval, and they'll send you either like a quote. You might be able to get some for free, but most of the time you're going to have to pay something. So they're going to send you a quote with saying like, yeah, you can use our song. And they'll send they'll send the contract that they've made for how you can use it. And this makes sure that you don't actually have access to the song after you're done with the film or the project you're working on. You don't own anything of the song. It's just you're able to use it. All that kind of stuff will be in their contract, and it'll have the quote of how much you're going to pay to use it. And then you can either try to negotiate it down a bit, or you can just accept it and pay that required license fee, and then you'll have access to their copyrighted project. But as always, you always want to review that entire contract. Make sure you agree to all those terms, because some of the terms might be really crappy and you won't even notice. Make sure they're not trying to screw you over as well, because they, sometimes bigger companies, they might put something in that they want access, or they want to have the ability to take down the film if it's getting negative reviews or whatever the case may be. They might put something in their contract just in case for their own selves. And you just want to make sure that you agree with all their terms before you sign the contract and pay the fee. Don't sign
makes sense.
something. Don't
I
sign and
mean-
pay for something if you don't read it.
Yeah.
That makes sense, yeah.
Also, if you're using lyrics or composition in your project, even if it's just a cover of a song, you'll still need the copyright. You won't need as much of the copyright, like there's different copyrights you're going to need, but you will need, if you're using the lyrics, you're going to need the copyright for the lyrics. And if you're using the composition, you're going to need I think it's the recording. There's two different copyrights that are needed in filmmaking for songs for the most part. And one of those is the recording license, which is the master use, which is like they recorded it and that's the final project. And the other one is synchronization licenses, which is the writing of it and all of that.
There's
so if
also,
you're trying to
like-
just use the lyrics, you're going to need a synchronization license. And if you're trying to use the composition, you'll probably need the recording license to be able to use that song.
There's
If
also
you're,
the
if you're
thing
creating it
of-
yourself and you're still using their composition, you'll still need a copyright, but it won't be the recording one. It'll be the synchronization one.
There's also the fact of like how much of the song you use, and that will also play a factor in how much you have to pay as well. So if you use just a tiny amount, just a few seconds, you're not gonna, in some cases, you don't have to pay as much as if you use the entire song. That varies obviously, but it can also be a thing.
Another thing to consider is like when you're going up in like song production, like the higher budget the song production is, and the more people that worked on it, the more copyrights you're going to need, because a lot of songs are written by multiple songwriters. You have the person who's making the music, you have the person who's writing the lyrics, you have the person who's recording it, and you have the publisher. All of these different people, and they might have their own copyrights to the music. The lyricist might have the copyright to the lyrics, while the hold on one second, someone's trying to come in. While the composer might have the copyright to the composition. And because
And
of
that's
this,
another.
you'll need to get each of these collaborators to give you permission. You'll have to get permission from each of them to be able to use that song. So you always want to be sure that you have exactly what you need whenever you're trying to get licensed music or copyrighted material, because if you only get it from one person and you think you're good, like, oh yeah, I got it. Like, let's say you got a song from Taylor Swift and you got permission from Taylor Swift. Well, you might not have permission from.
She's a copyright fiend. Even if you say her name, I don't know.
Well,
you never know.
Whatever. If you're trying to get Taylor Swift, a song from Taylor Swift, she might give you permission, but that doesn't mean you have permission from whoever wrote the song if she wasn't the one who wrote it, or whoever, the publisher was. So you have to get.
You really picked a problematic example here, because the whole copyright thing is like she's literally making new versions of her albums because she doesn't own her songs anymore. So she got bought off, and so now she's re-recording.
It's called an example, honey.
I know, but it's just like, why that one? It's just like,
I don't know. Because she was probably talking about copyright, which is why it came up. But anyway.
in your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you need different licenses, different copyright licenses from each of these different sources to make sure that you have all the things you need. And once you have everything, you're good to use the song. And like Priscilla said, depending on the length of the amount of song you're using, what was that? Anyway, depending on the length that you're using in the actual project, that will depend on the price as well. So if you're only using 9 seconds of it, or if you're using a minute of it, it's going to vastly change the price of how much it
If you're
costs.
using a cover of it, yeah, anything. Because V is asking, would that be the same, for instance, if the actor is singing in the shower or doing karaoke without the actual song, like during an upbeat scene? I would imagine so, just because you're using the lyrics, you're using the melody.
So if they're singing the karaoke, that means the composition is playing, the music of it is playing, the instrumental, and then also they're singing the lyrics. So that would mean you would need those copyright licenses to be able to use it. You would need
perhaps
the lyrics
to a lesser extent, but still.
Yeah, you wouldn't need the master or whatever, because you're not using the singer and all of that to actually do the song, but you would need the copyright for the lyrics and the copyright for the instrumental if you're using that copyrighted material.
The thing with copyright, it varies very much from region, from
yeah, actually the song Happy Birthday was copywritten a lot, and a lot of people were saying that they had to pay like a lot of money to this company that was claiming the copyright on that song, even though it's used so widely, and everyone thought it was in the public domain, but it was still, having copyright. So anytime it was used in a production or on any kind of like commercial use, it would have to pay a fee for the copyright.
And on the other end, using that's why so many movies had different versions of it, of the Happy Birthday song, either changing the melody, changing the lyrics, doing a little bit of both, so they could try to get around that.
The general policy is that the whole world is copyrighted.
That's a good policy. Yeah. And if you don't know, always just double, triple, quadruple check to make sure that whatever you're using, you have to make sure that it's in the public domain if you're using something and you believe it to be. Because another thing about the public domain is with songs, there might be something in the public domain. I think they used the example of like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And they said, yeah, that's in the public domain. But if you're trying to get the recording from I don't know what they said, it was somebody who made a recorded version of that, they're probably not in the public domain because they recorded their own version of it.
Extra version of it, yeah.
The composition may be in the public domain, but the recording isn't for that one. So you'd have to get a public domain recording as well as the composition, or hire musicians to recreate it. You can use the composition because it's public domain, but you'd have to have somebody make the recording of it. So it's a lot of different aspects to this.
There is also, as I mentioned, it can vary from state to state, country to country, region to region. A song might not be copywritten in one country and be copywritten in another. An example for the copyright license might be with one entity in one country and another entity in another. For example, when I think somewhat of an example of that would be when Netflix in different countries, they have different things because they have to request the ability to have those things in their catalog. So they have to communicate and ask for that version of copyright and the domain, and be able to have, I forgot the exact term of it when it's a TV show or a movie, syndication. But they have to request that as well. So it can vary very, even songs. Oh my gosh, yes, songs. So I remember specifically on Spotify when I lived in New Zealand, I had a bunch of New Zealand bands. I had a bunch of not even New Zealand bands, but just like British versions even of songs and specific albums that released in the UK or versions that released in the UK. And as soon as I returned to Brazil and even the US, it was gone. Like it still showed there, but it was unavailable in my region. And specific albums, like special albums that released in the UK or that released in the US, I didn't have access to depending on where I was, simply because of that.
Yeah, so always, if you're trying to use copyrighted material, always do your research. Make sure that you know who owns it and you know how many people have claim to it, how many different pieces are there and all of that, so that you can make sure that if you're using it, you have all of your bases covered and you're not going to get in trouble or have to take your project down, or even worse, sued or something like that later from not getting all of the copyright licenses that you need. So for lower budget projects, one way to save some money is to use songs from unknown songwriters. That's why a lot of independent films and stuff have a lot of indie artists that you haven't really heard before. They might be really good, but you've never heard them until that movie. And that can be beneficial for both parties. One, because they don't cost as much for the filmmakers, and the other side is because they want to have exposure. So that's why they work together, and that's why those independent films will boost up those indie artists sometimes, and the indie artists might boost up the film. Some films do really well because of their music. They have like really good soundtracks and people really enjoy it, and it really boosts up the film's exposure as well. So it's like a
lot of TV shows and smaller movies in the 2000s used to do that a lot. They would do like agreements with these smaller bands. Now people do agreements with people on SoundCloud and other music creating apps, and they negotiate like, hey, can we use your song? We looked at your stuff, we like it, we'd like to use it in a film. And they have like this agreement, and that's how a lot of bands got famous too and got big, because they were shown on these indie films and on these like smaller TV shows and stuff like that. I remember that back in the 90s and 2000s especially, they would I remember Charmed used to do this all the time. They would have artists that were like up and coming come on the show and perform, and because they had like a nightclub and they needed to have people performing, and they thought it would be cool because it's like, we'd have music that we can use in the intro and in the scenes at the club or whatever, and you guys would have the exposure. And that was super common in the 90s and 2000s. I think Britney Spears was even like in Sabrina the Teenage Witch and in like some other shows as well because of that, promoting songs when she was like lesser known.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So if you're using licensed music though, one good way to find bands that you like, and to find not instruments, but to find instrumentals that you like, is to go to something like SoundCloud, Premium Beat. There you can like view the music, you can see what you like, you can check the genre, the mood. There's different moods. It's like horror, scary, magical, mystical. So you can find kind of what you're looking for. And like, let's say you're making a sci-fi, futuristic sounding sci-fi, and then you go through here and you look through and just favorite whatever you like the best, and then you can buy the license to it, just like that. And I'm not sure if I don't know if Premium Beat charges one fee or if it's different, if it varies depending on which artist you are buying from, but you can always see what the price is.
I feel like most places have a standard rate, and then you can negotiate with the artist if it's like extra stuff, or the artists themselves will put their rates on the app or on the website, and people will be able to
you can see the price right here. So standard means like web-based or non-commercially distributed, which means you can't put it to theaters and things like that. You can't try to sell it. But premium would be non-web advertisements or revenue generating content.
So to V's comment in the chat, one thing that I do know is that some movies actually changed the song because of copyright reasons in other countries or in other regions, because of that, or even when they changed changed channels, like when they would air on another channel, that also changed. An example of that was Scrubs. So many songs were changed from Scrubs because they changed their I don't know if it was their network. They went to ABC, didn't they, or something like that? And then and then the original version, it's super hard to find. Honey, is that it?
What are you talking about?
Scrubs.
Oh, they changed networks and the network didn't want to, they were posting, like once they put it on a streaming service, they have to get the contracts again for the copyrighted material. So they had to change some of the songs because they didn't want to buy those songs again because they were trying to charge too much.
Yeah, because a lot of those songs in the early 2000s, they weren't that expensive, and then some of them blew up. Like one example that always irks me whenever we rewatch it is I think it was Nelly or something, Ride, basically. And there's a scene of Turk and JD and the song's playing, but depending on which version of the DVD you have, it's a completely different song and it doesn't match, and it just feels like the song just doesn't feel good in here. It's like they had another song and they put something else in. And I noticed that the first time I watched Scrubs, because I watched it with Coda for the first time, I noticed that some of the songs are a little off. And I was like, man, this is so weird. Like their song selection is so uneven. Some of the songs are on point and others just sound like they don't go. And he told me that and I was like, what? That makes so much more sense. So which song was supposed to be here? And then I looked it up. I was like, oh man, that sucks. Because those songs grew in popularity, and apparently, depending on the contract that they have, now that they're bigger, they can charge more for them.
It just shows how much music plays into the emotion in the scene, because the scene feels completely different without the original song, which they spend a lot of time finding. And then they, trying to find a replacement after you found one that works might work, but it won't work as well, or it'll just feel off, or it'll feel different because the song they chose in the original was, perfect for whatever scene they had.
So I know that in other countries, they will do that with movies. They will change, they'll be like, oh, this song can't play here for whatever reason. And so they will change up the song and add something else for either TV shows or movies. I don't know too much about it, but I know that much because I've lived in a few other countries and I've noticed that the songs are different, both in movies and in TV shows. And same with streaming services and stuff like that.
So then there's also on this site, Premium Beat, there's also apparently the subscription thing I was talking about, where it says subscribe and get 5 tracks every month for this amount. So, that's also on other sites. It's not just this one. And then there's also, but that's not for every song. So you also want to be sure that you know what you're getting into. If you're going to subscribe to a site like that, you want to be sure you see which tracks you're going to get, because the one above it doesn't have that. So it says this track cannot be licensed with a Premium Beat subscription, but this one can. So you just want to be sure you know what you're getting into if you're going to get a subscription like that. And if you're trying to get an individual license to something, one of these sites might be good for you. And if you just want to get in contact with the artists themselves to see if maybe they can make something for your film, or to try to get them to allow you to use their music on your project, something like SoundCloud is really good, because you can look up individual bands, you can look up artists, you can look up song types, you can look up genre, and then you can find kind of the music that you're looking for, kind of the music that you like, and then you can get in touch with those different bands, see maybe who publishes them. If they're not published, that's a great way to get in contact with them, because then it's solely theirs. If they are published, it adds a little bit more complexity, because then it's publisher and them. So you have to get permission from both. So it's just something to think about, but it is a good way to find people that you wouldn't have found before. Another thing people were saying is if you are going to use a site like Premium Beat or Bin Sound or one of those other sites that have just a bunch of listed music, and you're finding the music you want for your project, and we're under sci-fi and future, and let's say we were making a sci-fi film and we were going through and I really like this one. Oh, this song's really great. They say, don't stop there. Just say, click on favorite on it and then keep going, because you might find something that's even better. You might not, or that one might be the perfect thing, but you won't know until you go through the rest and kind of start comparing the favorites that you had that match your project. I think this one can also download the song and you can put it to your edit to see if you like it. It'll just have, that whatever it's called, like the watermark, but for sound. I don't know what it's called, but it says like premium beat and it's something like that, where it ruins the song, but it kind of shows you what it will sound like when you have that taken out, when you buy the license.
Oh, honey, isn't there also an agreement, depending on the contract you get, that you get the composer or the band that you use also gets part of the revenue for the film every time it's shown somewhere? That's also
Royalties.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
depending
I believe a site like this, this is royalty free. At least these ones are royalty free. I'm not sure I don't think the whole site is, but this one says royalty free. So I'm not sure if it is or not, but I do know if you're going to get something like from SoundCloud or something, I think a lot of this stuff isn't royalty free, and royalty free means that whenever it's shown, you don't have to keep paying them over and over again for the small percentages. It's also why Scrubs wasn't able to use it when they streamed it, because they had to start paying royalties again and get new copyrights and all that. But for instance, every time an episode of a TV show shows that has a popular song in it on TV, every time that song comes on, they have to pay royalties to the whoever owns it, the copyright people. So if there's several people who own it, they're going to get a little bit of money each time that episode plays on TV.
And it's also all about your contract agreement. Sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it's kind of like, and sometimes it might not be. It's just kind of, it's like when the actors do an agreement of, oh, do you want to get paid this amount now, or do you want to get paid a little less, but also get paid revenue from every time the movie or TV show shows, or releases somewhere or plays or whatever. So at the end of the day, it's a call that you might have to make. Sometimes you get both, but more often than not, you choose one or the other. And it can go either way. It can go really well, and then something becomes a cult classic, and 10 years later, you're reaping in a bunch of royalty money. Or sometimes it's good immediately, and it's like this huge thing, and you get a bunch. And sometimes it never pans out. So that's, it's another gamble.
Yeah, so I mean, you'll like those songs that do require royalties will require royalties either way. But like Priscilla said, the contract that they make might say more money up front, less money royalties, or the other way around. It might say less money up front, more money on royalties, because they believe it's going to expand and go everywhere. So
that's why it's good to negotiate contracts, to know what you want, to know what you can afford. To like believing in a film is great, but at the end of the day, you as someone who is giving a service, you have to weigh the pros and cons and make that choice depending on how good you think it's going to be, how much you think the audience will like it, and sometimes you'll get it wrong. That's just the reality.
Also, if you're trying to sell your project or put it to a streaming service like V's saying, that is also something to consider with like bigger songs, because they do cost more money. They are also going to cost those companies more money to buy it from you, because the royalties will be more expensive. So even if you paid the royalties, even if you paid the for the copyright initially, if it's especially in your contract, you need to make sure that you're able to sell it with you're able to transfer who owns the film project, and they still get access to the copyright of the song. Because if you don't have that in there and you're trying to sell your project, that's another fee that's going to go on to the distributor, and they don't obviously don't like extra fees. So that'd be something that would hold them back from buying your project, because you have access to that copyright, but in your contract, it doesn't say that it's going to transfer over to me when I buy it from you. So I'm going to have to also get that copyright, and that's expensive. So I don't want to do it. Sorry.
And this is why we nag about contracts and how important they are, even though they can be boring and annoying And at the end of the day, everyone's just trying to do what's best for them. It's not always like a scam thing. Sometimes it's just you got to be willing to negotiate and talk it over and see what works for both parties. And yeah, it's a tedious process for sure sometimes, but it is so worth it. More often than not, it's a tedious process.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like if you know you're trying to sell it to distributors, then you know that you want to have that in your contract. So just be sure to try to say that. They might not even, notice it. They might not even care. They might just already have that pre-designed in their contracts because they have that song. So they're giving it out to tons of different people, tons of different companies. They already have a template of a contract that they've made. And so some things are overlooked by them and they're not even thinking about, like, you want to make sure that it's transferable to the next person. They just don't want to give that to everybody right off the bat. But for you, like, they're like, oh yeah, sure, that doesn't matter. We understand that you're trying to sell your film. So sure, we will give you, we'll change that in the contract, and they might not even charge anything for it, or they might charge a little bit, or who knows. But it's always good to negotiate and to figure it out before you get into one of those situations where you realize that you can't do what you wanted to initially do with it because you are in these copyright annoyances. These
You're in copyright limbo.
yes, copyright limbo in your production hell because you have your finished project, but you're not gonna be able to distribute it anywhere because you messed up, you made a mistake. So always pay attention to those things because it's very, 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 very important.
Most productions, most films, most TV shows, most media die at pre-production because of that, because it's the stuff that is overlooked, the stuff that people don't take as seriously or don't pay attention to, or don't think is going to be that necessary in the long run. And then next thing you know, it's this big issue that holds you back from pushing your movie further out there, getting your movie out there finally.
Mhm. That makes sense.
Another way you can lower the budget of your projects is, like we already were saying, use music that's in the public domain. A lot of the older music you'll hear, a lot of it can be in the public domain because it's been out for so long. But again, just be aware that just because the composition's in the public domain or a certain version of the song is in the public domain does not mean the entire thing anywhere from anybody singing it is in the public domain.
Yes, because there is a law that after a specific amount of time, something can can become in the public domain. But you also have to consider estates. Estates can own that song, can own that property, families, that kind of thing. That can completely change the rules as far as that. Like,
Oh yeah, you always want to be sure that it actually is in the public domain. Don't just assume, because even if it's old, even if it's from 1950, you don't know if it's going to be in the public domain or not just because of that, because it could be, like she said, in an estate. They could own the license to it, the copyright. So don't just assume it's in the public domain. But even if it is in the public domain, that doesn't mean every version of it is. That doesn't mean every
a good
like
example.
you can hear a Christmas song and you've heard 100 different versions of the same song, but not. And even if one of them is in the public domain, that doesn't mean every version is, because they're all different. They're recorded by different people. They're published by different publications.
An example of
Publishers,
this,
I mean.
when we were like researching for our short film, there was one line where he said the word Kermit, like the frog. And we were like, oh my gosh, is that going to be a copyright issue? And I researched like 3 different websites, and it said that the copyright is for the words together, Kermit the Frog, not the word Kermit, because Kermit can be a name. So like, as long as you didn't put the frog, it was safe. But I still have the Jilly Wills about it. I'm still kind of like, I hope, like, I triple checked. It's gonna be really annoying if it ends up being an issue, but I don't think so, because it's a name. Like, people back then were called Kermit. So, I mean, at least I think so. Like, it didn't come out of nowhere. But I don't know. I think someone was called Kermit. But from what I've researched, and I researched like 3 different websites, the copyright was for Kermit the Frog. So that meant that like that specific part was in the public domain, the name Kermit, but not the Kermit the Frog part. So that's an example of how, like, one part of it might be in the public domain, but not the whole thing.
Yeah, so you always just want to check and make sure. And if once you find the version you want, you just want to check and make sure that that is also in the public
Or
domain.
something might be in the public domain, but not for a specific, like, oh, this is considered in the public domain as long as it's not for a specific amount of time, more than this amount of time on screen or whatever.
And are you sure about that one?
No, I just mean, like, for example, like if it's not too similar to the thing, or if it's not for too long. For example, copyright in YouTube. They say that all the time. This is a thing. They're like, transformative content. If you are reviewing something, if you are commenting on something, if you take breaks every 10 to 30 seconds, depending on the copyright, and you comment on it in between, or you only show a tiny bit of the image at a time, that falls under fair use.
Right,
So
but
you
that's
cannot-
for informational or like review purposes. For filmmaking and stuff like that, you can't use any kind of copyrighted material at all, no matter how long you're doing
No,
it.
exactly. But I'm saying that, like, as far as media goes, like, we're not just talking about film, we're talking about media in general. So, like,
I'm
it
talking
really
about scripted content.
Well, yes, even scripted content shows, for example, there are scripted content where they'll be watching a movie and they will show scenes of a movie. Like, I've seen movies where they're watching Casablanca or It's a Wonderful Life, or, you know, movies like that for like a few seconds, and it shows on screen for a few seconds.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they still have to pay the copyright for that to be.
No,
in the
I
thing.
know, but I'm saying that sometimes you pay less, or depending on the region and depending on how old the movie is, you might not have to pay as much, if at all, depending on circumstances. Like if it's shown in the corner of the screen and it's like just his face or something. So that's another thing, like things have nuance.
You might not have to pay, but you still have to get copyright. So
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, like every single thing has different copyrights. So like don't assume that one thing is exactly the same as the other. Sometimes you might be able to get away with a thing or two, but just do your research, is what I'm saying.
no, never assume you can get away with anything. Try to
No,
always
I'm
get the copyright for everything.
I'm saying do your research.
But I'm saying for scripted content, for commercial use, for filmmaking, and for putting it out theatrically, you almost always need copyright for any
Okay,
copyrighted
the world
material.
it's
You need the
copyright, my
licenses
friend.
for it because
True
you can't
what I
just use it, sell it. I don't care if
No,
it's
you're
in the corner of the screen.
No,
If you
you're
want
right.
to
You're
see
right. You're right. It's
half his
better to be
face,
copyright.
it doesn't matter. You have to get the copyrighted material. So keep that in mind.
You're
Yes,
right.
for other kinds of content, for media that's like YouTube and stuff like that, where they're commenting on it, they're making fun of it, they're doing a parody, that's fair game. But if it's not in the public domain, it's not, and it is copyrighted material, you have to get the copyright license, no matter how little of it you're using. You might not have to pay. They might not care. Oh, you're only seeing the very left part of his arm on the screen, then I don't care if you can use it for free. But depending on how annoying the company is, or depending on how big of a thing you're trying to use, they might require you to pay something for the fee no matter what. So that's just something to keep in mind.
All right. I'm sorry.
How about when you're critiquing, when you're the critics, right? The movie critics, they use clips, or maybe they're mentioning about the movie.
Yeah, that's
But-
considered transformative content because it's a
Right.
review for purposes.
But in the present day and age, there is monetization also going on YouTube. So how does that really become fair use?
Because
Like I
they're making it's kind of like news. And so
Mhm.
like news is able to put pictures of things or video content of things without having to like pay
So the-
copyright,
So,
because they're just
first of all-
commenting on it about what
First
it
of all,
is.
Depending on what it is, yes, some people can get away. For example, on YouTube, there was a time where only news outlets could say the word coronavirus without being demonetized, but YouTube decided who was considered a news outlet and who wasn't. So some like commentary channels or like smaller news channels, blogs, that kind of thing, were not considered news, and so they got copyright stricken every time they said it. So there's also that. In other cases, it really depends on how you use it and if it's considered transformative content or not. For example, I know people that review songs that I watch, and they will show a clip of the song, but they will show it for like 5 seconds. the audio for 5 seconds, and then they might show like clips of the music video here and there. But it really also depends on the company. I know Warner Brothers, for example, I don't know if it's Warner Brothers or Universal. I think it's Universal. They are so annoying with their music, and you cannot even show like 3 seconds or 3 to 5 seconds without them trying to copyright strike you. So that's a thing that people take into consideration as well. Like Universal Music Group, they're really annoying with that. So I think it's a mix of what is considered fair use under YouTube, what you as a channel are considered on YouTube, so what you can get away with, what you can talk about, and that specific company's guidelines.
Yeah, because honestly, some of the YouTube stuff might be copywritten and it might not be legally obtained, but it's such a small
there's
channel, they don't
also-
have enough money that the company doesn't really care to go out and look for it. But
There's
certain
also-
companies are gonna, like Universal or whatever the company was, they'll go after every single person that's trying to use their content because they don't want anyone to use it without them giving permission.
There's also people who put a disclaimer in front of their video stating that all of the rights are for this specific company and that kind of thing, and who can also negotiate like, okay, part of the proceeds of this video, if it makes anything, will go towards this company since I'm using their clip or something like that. But most people, they just use like the disclaimer in front when they're smaller and even when they're bigger, saying that this is like ownership of blah, blah, blah. And with that, you kind of, it's the same thing as saying alleged when you're talking about a source that like technically is true, but you don't want to get sued. And you still say allegedly, and that way you can't get sued, even if it is true, but they can try to sue you. And when it's a smaller company, when it's a smaller channel, they really can't go after you. The most they'll do is try to shut down your video, make you re-upload it without all that content. Like one time we used a Rick and Morty scene that we were watching in one of these videos, and Coda got a notice that there was a copyright thing in here, and we had to cut that out of the video. So they will review it and they will let you know. Or if you are monetized, they will ask for part of the proceeds or to basically remove your monetization from that video.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of different rules and laws that go into place depending on what the content is. But for this kind of content, for filmmaking and like scripted content that you're trying to either sell or just have on like YouTube or something, most of the time it is going to need all the copyrights and everything, because it is not that kind of content. It's not transformative content where you're commenting on it or you're reviewing it.
But thankfully, if you are looking at it from the YouTube space, there are many videos that explain, depending on what you want to do on YouTube, how to work around that system and what you can do depending on your content and what you're geared towards. Like it's
also,
a lot
those
more.
rules are constantly changing. Like they're always different.
Yes, YouTube just sent me an email a few days ago that their terms and policies changed. So yeah, it's fun.
But yeah, anyway, so that is a lot different for other kinds of media. But what we're talking about is just scripted content and films, short films, TV shows, stuff like that. And in those things, you're always going to need the copyright material because you're using that copywritten material to enhance or be part of your story. So, and because you're doing that, you need to get permission.
It's tricky and it's so easy to say the wrong or slip. And I think it's great when you have a good team where it's just like everybody just is in it to do good. That's the best case scenario. But it can be tricky with all of like the copyrights and things, and yeah, it can be hard but good.
Yeah, at the
Yeah,
end
you
of the
just want to make sure you have somebody on it that knows what they're doing so that you can make sure you're doing everything you need to do. Because the worst thing that would
Yeah.
happen, well,
And
I
at
mean, not the worst thing that would happen. The best thing that might happen if they did catch you and you're using something in your project, your film, is they tell you you can't distribute it anywhere, you can't use it anywhere. So now you have this whole thing you've made, and because you're using their piece of work, you can't upload it anymore. You can't
And at the end of the
distribute it.
day, we
Or
also
you'd
have
have to take out the thing, and if it's integrated into the project, then that's going to be really hard to do, and it's going to make it a worse project because of it. So
at the end of the day too, we also have to look at it objectively and not like, oh, these companies are all evil and they're trying to shut us down. They're just protecting their content and protecting their work and what's theirs. And if it was your movie, for example, and people were posting it, were like leaking it online, or your music that you worked hard for and you produced and paid for, and then it leaks online or something like that, like, we also have to always look at it from the business standpoint. It's not always evil greed. Sometimes it is, but it's not always. Sometimes it's just protecting your intellectual property. And that's fair.
Definitely. And I think, like
yeah,
I
absolutely.
said,
Because if you just let one person do it, then everybody gets to do it, and you have less of a claim, because then it's more like, oh, well, you let that one person do it.
I
So
just feel like sometimes that can be lost when we're talking about contracts and rights and this and that, because it can feel annoying and it can feel a little restrictive. But at the end of the day, it's just to protect our own property and each other's properties and the hard work that people put into it.
yeah, protect, like, exactly, protect the hard work that everyone's doing. I mean, the best thing is just to have the mindset of everybody wants to see it succeed. Everybody wants to see it protected. If you have that mindset where that's where it is, it's like everybody's like on the same kind of like wavelength. And I think it's actually good to be in those situations where it is real content is protected and you're working with these
Because I'm
companies.
sure if you were a company, you wouldn't find it fun either, having to like copyright a bunch of people all the time. Like, oh, again, like at some point you're just kind of like wanting to live your life. And I'm sure it can be kind of annoying to have to keep an eye out for that.
For copywriting, having to copyright all the time.
No, yeah, I'm sure as a company, as a musician, you don't want to be constantly like, oh crap, another person's using my stuff. I have to copyright it, or I have to review it, or I have to, I'm sure it's not fun. It takes away from their work. It's annoying.
well, they're not the ones reviewing it usually. It's usually
Yeah, it
their
sucks that people
publisher is doing it, or
it's annoying,
their
but
representative.
it's annoying, but you get used to it, and it's good because then your content is protected. It's just like protecting, yourself.
Yeah,
You're
I'm just
protecting your
saying
work.
that
I
it's
think
not
good.
like it's not like a fun process, and it's not like it doesn't take longer for both parties, and it's more
But
work.
worth it. But at the end of the day, once you realize that it is like better, then
Yeah, if you look at it from the
it's not good.
standpoint of production, and like you're looking at it from a production standpoint, or like, you're the owner of the thing, then you can totally see it. Why it's done, why they need that copyright, because let's say that we're making films and everything, and then some bigger company tries to come in and take our stuff without our permission and use it in their big project.
Yeah.
Well, that's not fair to us either. So like that's why that's there, so that we could also claim that they stole our copyright, and vice versa. They do the same thing, because they don't want everyone just using their copyright for free. They don't want it I might not want to have my projects be in a film about incest or something. Like it just depends on what the content is as well. You might not want it in that project. So that's
And you might
another
just
thing.
want to cut, and that's where it comes down to, like, you don't necessarily, like you said, like if you have a video and you're like, oh, we didn't like that one piece, just cut it off. Simple. Like, just don't include that. If somebody, like, if you're doing a Disney Channel and you're filming a movie and the actor goes fuck at the end, you're gonna be cutting that fuck out.
Yeah, but our whole point is that, like, if you're doing a movie and if you end up running across that issue later on, it's going to be really annoying and a hassle. And so if you can avoid it, do your research, because that's just going to hold you back even further. It's going to waste more time in production. And
Yeah, so there's a difference if the copywritten project is integrated into the film, if like somebody's singing it on set and it's like a scene, and it's different if you're just putting it over the scene at the end, because you can always take that song out if you can't get the copyright. But if it's like integrated into the scene, if it's integrated into the whole film because it's an important aspect, then you just need to make sure you're getting all those copyrights before you even begin. Because if you make that whole thing with that in mind, and then you find out, oh, it's going to cost too much, or they're not going to give me permission to use their thing, then that
Oh, it makes
whole
complete
integration
sense.
is worthless.
Yeah, and that sucks. And nobody wants to go through everything to have it be like worthless at the end. That's the
Right.
worst. Absolutely. That would be like so aggravating. It's just like you're sitting there, it's just like, and they're like, oh, did you even want it to work? It's like, what do you mean? Nobody goes to all of that trouble to create something, you know? So
Yeah.
I get it.
Nobody
And it's
wants
one
any
of
of that stuff to happen. So
no, so it's
neither
great.
party wants that to happen. So it's always good
Exactly.
to like communicate and to reach out and to figure out what you need to get done beforehand. And
Yeah,
if
and
it's in
then
post-production and you're just putting a song over, then just make sure you're not trying to release it or
Mhm.
distribute it. Make sure you're not trying to talk to distributors that song's in there until you actually get full permission to use it and have that whole contract signed and everything, because you might be in talks with somebody to use their project, or not their project, but to use their song or their lyrics or their composition. And then they say, never mind at the last second. And you're talking to this distributor and you're saying, yeah, this band is going to be in it and their song's really good. Listen to their song. And they're like, oh yeah, I really like that. And they're ready to buy the project when it's ready. But now you don't have the song, and you'll have a harder time with that distributor. So you don't want to jump the gun. You want to always take your time, take the necessary steps, and make sure that you're getting all your ducks in order before you go to
yeah,
the next step.
definitely. Because like at the end of the day, you want it to be like smooth and run well across the board for everybody, all of your ducks in a row. It's good to have that. And the company is going to want all their ducks in a row too. And it's like, and if everybody has all their ducks in a row, then it's fantastic and everything runs smooth. Everything looks great. You have a beautiful finished product. It goes to distribution. It does decently well. It might not be the best, but it does good. And everybody goes home with smiles on their face. It was worth it. That is the goal. Yeah. Woo.
Yeah. So one good way to try to find out who owns a particular song, you can use this site, I think it's ASCAP, where you can actually like look up the different music, the song that you're trying to use, and it'll tell you who owns it and who owns what piece of it and stuff like that, so that you can figure it out. They might not have every single songwriter and person in it, but they have they have like over 850,000, I think, songwriters in their whatever it's called, their
Catalog.
yeah, in their catalog. So it's a good resource to like see. I think the other one is called like BMI or something like that. And you just go to one of those websites and you figure out who owns the project, who owns the song, the publishing rights, the lyrics, or whatever, and then you can reach out to them and contact them and see if you can use it, because it is kind of a little tricky to also figure out who owns everything. And that's why it's good to go to one of these websites where they have all of this information available, to make it easier for everyone, so that they can figure out who owns it, who do I need to get in contact with, and who do I need to pay to access this stuff. But whatever music you use, just make sure it complements the work and it doesn't overpower it. I see this mistake a lot, where people will take like a really epic song and they'll put it to something that's kind of subpar, like it's not really that cool, but they have this really epic song playing over it. And it actually deters the audience and makes them, and what was meant to enhance the project and make it really cool and epic, actually detracts from it and makes it a little worse, because
Makes it look more cheap. It makes the flaws stand out more, because it's this really epic sound with this not that epic video imaging, and so it cheapens your movie. It makes it look cheaper. It doesn't. It shows the flaws more, and it shows the it's just not a good match. It's like a weird contrast, you know.
Yeah, and that happens with other things too. So if you have a very low budget looking visual style, you don't want a very high budget audio style, because those aren't going to match well. You want the whole film to flow together.
Not saying you should have good audio, people. It's not what we're saying.
Right.
Just make-
But we're
Like the
saying
whole
that you
flow
shouldn't
is
have
just
like the best song ever if you have not very good on the visual side, or if it's more of like an old feel style, then you don't want to have a new sounding song to it usually. Now that is kind of subjective, but normally you try to have this whole thing flow together. Sometimes you do want it to actually contrast and be a complete opposite for whatever you're going for in the actual project, but just be aware of that it's not gonna, it's one of those other things. It's like a rule that if you know it, you can break it, but if you don't know it, you don't want to break it. So just have it flow together. Don't have it overpower and overtake the rest of the project, because you don't want it to stand out. You want the song to, or the song or the music to enhance your film, not to take over.
I'm so stupid. I read the name weird wrong. Let's just say that.
Huh? Oh, another thing they said, which I'm not sure how true this is, but they say like a loose rule of thumb is to allot about 10 to 15% of your budget to music. So whatever budget you have, maybe try to
I
keep about
feel
10 to
I feel
15% for the music, because
so.
if you are getting these licensed things, if you are getting these big budget songs, then it is going to cost quite a bit. So you want to
So
make
here's
sure
the
that
thing. I feel like the person that said that was a composer. And at the end of the day, something that we've noticed is that every single department will say, leave 10 to 15% for this and leave 10 to 15% for that. Every single department will say that. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I do say though, at the end of the day, it is important for you to do your research and for you to see how much things cost to have an overall, but to estimate your overall budget. So you will be able to know with the cost of everything, the average cost of everything, and always estimating a little bit higher than average, because that's just smart right there. You can always run into issues here and there. That you will have a better idea. I don't know if 10% is always necessary, depending on your project and how much music is going to actually be in it. 10 to 15%. However, I really do think it varies from scale, and music is very important to the overall feel. So I can't say that no, don't do that, because at the end of the day, I have seen the difference that music makes, both positively and negatively, in a film.
I'll say
say,
the budget, the whole thing with the budget, to me, I think it really depends on what the project is. If we're making an action movie that has just like a lot of, I don't know, very energetic themes and songs and whatever else, then it's probably not going to be as much money as if we're making a very dramatic film that has these very emotional, popular songs that we want to use to really illustrate how the character's feeling or to match the tone of the film. So it really depends on how much the music is supposed to be meant to help enhance the film, and how much its importance is, what its role is, and where your budget's going. Because for the action film, a lot of your budget's going to be going to stunts, visual effects, things like that.
but on the other hand, having action-packed music also helps build tension.
Right, but I'm saying like that won't be as expensive as getting a bunch of different copyrights.
Right. It won't be as specific. You won't need like a full score made most of the time, unless you want like something distinctive or something that's yours. Yeah, and it's not as like when the movies. There are many films that have music more as like quietly in the background, just to help with tone and just to help with flow as well. So yeah, I definitely feel like it depends on the project. I just don't want to be that person that's like, oh, they're just, because they work in that department, they think they're more important. No, that is not what I'm saying. Just want to make that very clear. I'm just saying that it can very much vary, and at the end of the day, it's more on you when you're doing the budget to see how much these things cost an average, how much, and look at your story, look at the overall script and production, and see how much of a role that thing is going to have. Of course, basic things like sound, image quality, sound quality, camera quality, those are important. But I'm talking about the other little things, you always have to keep those in mind. And it really varies. So I feel like that's more of a case to case basis.
Yeah, that's why they said loose rule of thumb, because obviously it's going to be very different depending on what the project is. It's not going to be exactly that amount every single time, but they say, if you're just keep in mind that it does get expensive. Music is expensive. Either you're making the music for your project, you're making a composition for it, you're getting a composer to write the composition, or you are licensing it, you're getting a copyright for some song that's already made, or you're doing something like that. So, or maybe you're just buying one on like a royalty-free website, but you're still going to have to pay. If you're not doing it yourself, you're still going to have to pay somebody to match it to your film. So there's a lot of different things that go into play with when you're trying to do the music. So that's why they say to just keep in mind. All I would say is just keep it in mind and budget it in. No matter what budget you have, just remember music is going to cost something, and keep that in mind whenever you're doing it.
Yeah.
So
and
if you're
also what
trying to
happens-
go super, super cheap, which I don't know if I'd recommend this, but there are free songs that are copyright free, which means that you can use them. There's different copyright licenses for them. Obviously there's that public domain, which means, that you can use it, anybody can use it. If it says CC BY, that means you can use the music however you want. You can copy and publish it. You can use it for commercial use. You can modify and adapt it. You can change the license on it. And you don't really need to do anything. You can just use it however you want. Then there's also the CC BY SA, where SA means share alike. And that means you can change the track and share it with others as long as you keep it under the same common, it's called Creative Commons, these licenses, by the way. Creative Commons license, the CC BY SA. So you can't change that, but you can do any of the other things. Then there's also the CC BY ND, where ND stands for no derivative works, which means you can use the music, but you can't make any alterations or changes to it. So you can't adjust it in your project, but you can use it however else you want. And then there's CC BY NC, which means non-commercial. And that's the one you kind of want to avoid if you're trying to make films, and especially if you're trying to distribute it, because non-commercial means you're not going to be able to make any money using that song or that to the soundtrack. So you can use the money, you can use the music, but you're not going to be able to profit off of it if you're trying to sell something and you're trying to put it in like a infomercial or something. That's not allowed either. So there's some things to keep in mind. And then there's like the ones where it's kind of like a mix, like the BYNCSA, where you can't use it for commercial use, and you also can't change it, or you can't change the license. And then there's the other one where you can't adapt or modify it, and you also can't use it for commercial use, which is the BYNCND.
I also want to add is that most of these music kind of becomes expensive, and the 10% rule comes in from the fact that there are multiple people involved here, like the songwriter, the singer, the musicians, the composer. So you may get copyright from one person, but another person might have objections to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you keep paying all these different people involved. And that's why the music kind of becomes very expensive, especially if you have musicals. You have so many songs in your musicals, and they tend to the price kind of seem to go higher.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why composer has one rate for the whole movie, but then the songs will have another rate for
Yes,
use
exactly.
individually.
That's why I say it varies, because not every movie needs a composer and a music mixer or whatever, all the other all the other people working in music. Sometimes they just need one person, or sometimes they just need a company, or sometimes they just need like a smaller band, or sometimes they'll need a bigger band, so it varies very much. Sometimes you can pay more than 10%, honestly, depending on how important integral music is to your story.
Also, if you're doing something like a musical, obviously
Yeah.
music is going to be a huge part of it, so it's going to be a much bigger part of the budget.
So
like
it
La La
really
Land, I'm sure their budget for the music was way over 10%, 15%.
Yeah, I mean, they got
Because
people who
integrated
couldn't
into the
sing on
entire film and the
purpose,
original
but
works and all of that. So
they got people who couldn't sing on purpose, but they got really good songwriters to make up. I mean, they did say it was on purpose.
So something I'd like to add that I didn't mention was the so if you're using a Creative Commons license, the BY license, it lets you distribute, remix, tweak it, and build upon the original work, even use it commercially. You just have to credit the original creation. So you still have to say like credit to this person who made the original that you're tweaking and modifying and whatever
Oh
else.
yeah, a good example of that is, well, you guys don't really know Anita, but her god-awful version. You've heard Girl from Rio. It's been all around everywhere. Basically in the song, she samples basically layers over the Girl from Ipanema, Garota de Ipanema from Tom Jobim. And she actually has to give him credit because she used so much of the song. And there's a lot of artists that will sample a song, but they won't have to give, depending on how much of the song they sample or how much of the melody they use or the beat or whatever, they won't have to necessarily give the person writing credit in the song. But because she basically put like half of the melody in the beginning and underneath and layered over it with her song, which wasn't bad, it was just not my taste. She had to actually give him writing credits because of it. And a lot of people, depending on how much they sample a song, even when it's a beat, or even when it's like the beginning of it or just a layer of it underneath, they will have to give the original creator writing credits. So that too, like even if it's like a mixture of multiple songs or something like that.
So basically, yeah, when you're using Creative Commons licenses, you just want to be aware of the different ones because they'll have different terms. Like you can use the attribution share alike one, CC BY-SA. That means you can use it, you can remix it, you can tweak it, you can use it for commercial purposes. You just have to credit the original and keep it under identical terms and have the identical license for it. So that means that you still have to let people share your version now. And you have to also, you also have to credit the original work. And then that can just, continue on like that. But if you have the other one, CCBY, all you have to do is credit the original work, and you don't have to let them let anyone else further take your new version of that song and change it up any further, because you don't have to keep the license the same. You can do whatever you want with it. All you have to do is credit the original. And you can see on the left, it says most free. To the bottom, it says least free. And so if you see these little symbols, you want to know what they mean. You can look it up easily, just like I did, Creative Commons licenses, and find it. Now, Creative Commons music, from what I've seen, what I've heard, it's not very good. I've tried using some before and it's really hard to match, and it's usually not that good. Now, I'm sure there's some good stuff out there. It's just going to take a lot longer to find. You're going to have to sift through a lot more stuff to find some good stuff, because it's free.
And sometimes they're going to be a little too generic. More often than not, they're going to be somewhat too generic or too specific to what you're looking for.
And I'll also say that these licenses, the Creative Commons and these free music sources are usually used more for like corporate videos or for, little YouTube videos or projects like that. They're less often used for films and short films and things that are trying to be a little more, what do I say, higher production, I guess, than the just the videos and corporate videos like that.
Higher budget?
Well, they're not necessarily higher budget. They're just trying to have a higher production value.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Just want to make sure we don't.
Yeah, but if you are going to try to look for some of these Creative Commons songs and that have no copyright, there's some websites like that I've heard: Incompetech, CC Mixter, Planet Purple. Those are some of the popular websites that have a bunch of different Creative Commons music, right? You can use with these different licenses on them that you can figure out which one you want to use and how you have to use it.
Yeah, I want to add something to that. Is the Creative Commons, like when you're using the music and you're layering, as Priscilla was mentioning, you're creating content which is new. But if you have like the lyrics which are exactly the same, so from that perspective, your lyrics are not, you're not creating content out of the lyrics. Those lyrics are.
If you use too much of the melody as well, like if it's
Yeah.
just too distinctive to the point where it's like more than a few
Right.
seconds of the song or something like
Yeah,
that.
and rightfully so, because the melody is something which whoever the singer is kind of generates it out of his practice or out of his imagination from days of work. And obviously, like if you're trying to use that with a layer on top of it and then claiming that it's yours, that usually doesn't go very well, especially in the filmmaking thing. From what I heard is that the distributors want the contracts of everything that I've used before they can take your film out for distribution.
Yes, because if you are missing anything and they're buying it from you, now it's on them. So they always want to make sure. That's why they even make whoever, if you're trying to get your film distributed, then you are going to have to get E&O insurance, which is error and omission. Right. And that's if you left anything out or if you did any errors in your contracts. They have this insurance that's going to cover that cost because of your mess up so that they don't have to cover it.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, so yeah, that's why like you'll see a lot of people, they'll use different things like Vish was just saying, like some people will try to use the underlying theme of a song and they'll only use a certain instrument or they'll only use, the certain the melody or something like that will be very, very similar and they'll just barely tweak it and then say it's their own thing. But if they get caught, they can get in trouble for using that copyrighted material, which is why it's always good to just try to get that license and not try to, not try to go around it because it's very hard to. And if you get caught, then your whole project might be doomed and you don't want that. It's not worth it. So I would say it's not worth it to just try to, I would say it's always worth it to try to get the license instead of trying to just do it, guerrilla style, I guess.
Yeah. Or just create your original content, like hire a musician, hire a singer, write your own lyrics and then do it. That's the best way.
Yeah, that way you know that it's yours. And you just got to make sure you get that contract with them. Get a contract with them, making sure that once they give it to you, you own the material and you're good. But yeah, that is the best way. And it is the best way to get it matching your film too most of the time, because you have somebody that you're talking to, that you're working with. So if you can afford it, getting a composer to work with you is probably the best way to get exactly what you're wanting.
And that Coda mentioned about like getting it in writing that work is a one-time thing and that you are paying them for it. That is extremely important because there are so many cases, both in music, TV shows, comics. We're seeing it hugely now with families of Marvel writers suing Disney for work, but at the end of the day, that it's work that some cases are actually work that they created, and in the contract it said that it was stuff that they paid for one and done. So
Yeah, you
having that
remember
is
there was.
extremely. Go
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that having that is extremely important because if your movie is very successful, they could come out later and be like, oh, well, actually, you owe me more for that because it was, which, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the contract you negotiated. Yeah, it sucks if it's super successful and you're like, oh man, I could have made more money from that. But at the end of the day, it's a contract you both agreed on. And it is kind of not the best for people to later go and like, even though I'm not a Disney fan, Disney overlords, but at the end of the day, I do kind of see as for contract reasons that case that unfortunately, if they did agree that it was that intellectual property, they were selling it and they didn't own the rights to it, then yeah, they don't own the rights to it.
Wasn't there a case with Jennifer Lawrence and Disney? I think they had something going on, right?
Oh no, that was completely different. That was Scarlett Johansson. It was completely different. That was absolutely disgusting. But it was also a contract issue because she stated in her contract that she would get more revenue from theaters, but that they would have a main theatrical release and then release it later on streaming. They did not do that. They did not honor the contract. They released it on streaming almost immediately after because they would make more money that way and they would have to pay her less. That was despicable. That was disgusting. And that was completely against the contract that they had made. However, they do say that there were loopholes in the contract that might have made it possible, which is why people read the freaking contracts, make sure you're negotiating, that kind of thing. I haven't seen how that turned out.
When you're that big, when you're that up to that level and it's that much money on the line, I would always say make sure you're hiring a really good lawyer to look over the thing.
Yeah, her lawyers are suing.
Because, some of these contracts are going to have wording that is kind of not very extremely clear what it exactly means or, what that entails. So, if you're up to that high of a risk reward system where it's like, if I mess this up, then I'm losing out on hundreds of thousands or millions.
She lost 50 million.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're at that standard, then you want to get a team of lawyers to look over it to make sure they all are in agreement that this is a good contract and that it's going to work. And
a lot of people said, oh, she's whining, it's not that much money. It's the principle of the thing. At the end of the day, if you have an agreement and the company's being sneaky and like going through loopholes to not pay you what you're owed, that is dirty and that's not right. So that was the situation with that. I still have to see where that's going because litigation stuff like that takes a really long time. So I doubt it's going to be settled anytime soon. But
anyway,
we'll see. But that's a good. I just meant to touch on that as an example of make sure you have that agreement with the person that hey. I'm buying this property for you for this film, this one and done. Or if they want, no, I would like the proceeds to anything you do later. If the song is if the movie's out in other places and it gets big and the song plays, I want be open to negotiating, but just know, don't be sneaky, but also be clear with what you intend, what you can afford, and what you want. Always.
Now, if you can't afford a composer, then there's also these stock music websites that make it a little bit easier for like royalty-free music to where you can get access to these songs and the contracts are already on the website itself. Read over them still, make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. But it does make it a bit easier because you already have the copyright within the website itself. There's different websites for it, like Music Bed. There's this one, Pond 5, the Art List. I think that's this one. There's Art List, there's Music Vine, Premium Beat, Marmoset, Bin Sound. So all these different websites that offer these royalty-free music with either a subscription to the website per month or a one and done payment for individual songs or soundtracks.
Yeah, I think it's, when it comes down to the end of the day, like, I think it's pretty dick to screw people over. Or like if
Well,
you
yeah,
know
if you're trying to
that they
intentionally
don't
screw someone
know.
over, that's a dickish move.
I mean, it happens. It's happened to me a lot, and it's a sad thing.
Well, to comment on that, you also got to look, because you're talking about signing contracts with artists and locking in songs, but you have to understand that depending on how you lock in that contract, it's like some artists have an understanding that you're going to take their song and put it in a movie, and they're going to get some kind of either royalty or accreditation for it. But there are a lot of movies out there that have been made and have not been released. Like there's just a shit ton of work that you've never seen before that is just sitting in some studio. And a lot of artists will fight for that music back. Like right now, a feature that I worked on with some buddies of mine, we did an entire feature, and the guy that wrote the script he's a musical artist, he's a rapper, and he just happens to know a guy with $1 billion, so he knows him, and he was like, hey, so he got him to produce the movie, and the executive producer is like, right, and he's made movies before, so he's in the business, so he knows what he's doing, and they signed off the artist, and now they're upset because they made the movie. We finished the movie like it's been almost 2 years now. They didn't do anything with the movie. And now the artist she took her song off the soundtrack. And the producers are like highly upset. The assistant director is highly upset because now they're trying to sell the movie, and now they have to redo the whole entire soundtrack because of that one song. And so I recently did a music video shoot with her, and I asked her, I said, what's going on with the song? Why did you take your song off the track? And pretty much what she said to me was like, it's been 2 years, and she wanted the song for her album. She wanted the song back. And if they're not going to do anything with it, give it back. So, you know what I mean? Even though she was like, she was paid, and she signed this contract, but it's kind of fucked up to buy something and then not do anything with it. Or let's just say your movie sucks. Like now all of a sudden you have this soundtrack to, like, just imagine like Dragon Ball Evolution, probably like one of the worst movies in movie history. Whoever sounds like it was just a big, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's just, so you have to look at that aspect too. Even though you're doing the right thing and saying, oh, let me get these copyrights, you could also be getting yourself into some trouble, because if your movie bombs, then you're going to have some artists that might be coming after you and saying, hey, look, like we want this back, or we want this back. And then, at that time, you might be looking at a ruined movie, or I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure, but
I don't know.
yeah.
There's so many things that it's just write another fucking song. I don't know. That's what I would do. Be like, instead of going into like a huge litigation, I would just, I'm like one of those people that I hate prolonged, endless fights over stupid stuff, because at the end of the day, that is your time. It
Yeah, I
should
do
be
agree
fun.
with it. I don't feel
That's the
like
business. That is the
yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, she signed a contract, it was an agreement, and there's always
You're muted, honey.
Oh, I thought,
Yeah, I guess that's probably why I've been having
I'll be
cold feet
closer.
lately. The business is
Can they hear
just,
me now?
I think so.
Yeah, I can hear myself. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, yeah, that sucks for her, but she signed a contract, and when you're doing a film, you always have to have that in the back of your mind, that this might not make it, this might not be a blockbuster hit, this might not be the next what's it called? Scream? No, not a torture porn thing that for some reason became
Saw?
huge. Saw, yeah, that thing. You know, the sleeper hit that cost $1 million to make and somehow became like huge and spawned 8 sequels. Like there's when you're working in the film industry, there's always that chance. There's always the chance with TV shows when you're going out for pilots. Yeah, that was your time, and you could have spent it on something else, and it didn't get picked up. Oh well. So yeah, it really sucks. And if it was a song she's really proud of and she wanted to put on her album, but at the end of the day, if she signed a contract, next time maybe she'll know to like put that in agreement. Oh, if it doesn't come out in this amount of
No,
time,
no,
I
no.
have the right to
She got her
release it
song.
somewhere else.
She got her song. Like there was nothing like nobody could do. Like I don't blame. I'm not mad at her because at the end of the day, they took almost 2 years to try it. Now all of a sudden, at first, like I thought the movie was done. I was upset too because it's like, I mean, even though I was paid, like still like you gotta. I mean, I think Lakota, we were going back and forth in the DC actors thing about actors getting paid and stuff.
Oh
And
yeah.
one of the actors had mentioned, she was like, oh, I did this film and I wasn't paid and they didn't actually make the movie and I didn't get anything out of it. I've been on productions where I've gotten paid and then the movie doesn't come out and I still feel like I was ripped off, even though I was paid.
No,
So,
I
like-
Yeah,
understand
because
that.
you're waiting for the same thing. You're waiting for the film to come out so you can show it off
I'm
and
not-
say, hey, look, I did this on this
That's
project.
not
I'm
what-
not saying like, oh, she's dumb. She shouldn't have signed a. That's not what I mean. I
she
just
got
mean
paid
like
back.
at the end of the day,
Well, you don't
that's
know
just
what-
unfortunately what happens, and it's an experience that hopefully she'll take and be like, you know what, next time I do this, I'm going to put in my contract that if they take more than a year to release the film, I get to release this song on my album. I get to release
it might
it.
not be a next time, there's
So
some
she's
people
not
that
stuck waiting for
what she-
them,
But you
That's
have to
like-
understand, like,
you know what I mean? Like once people get like, there's certain people, like it's just like people should think a little more and like work it out, be like, there's gotta be other ways to like not be a dick on either side.
Because sometimes it's not even them being a dick. Sometimes it's just poor management. Probably post-production is taking forever because they probably suck at it maybe.
no,
it-
they just weren't
or
making
maybe
it.
they're just
They're just
lazy.
what?
They just weren't doing anything. Like the co-assistant director, I think Red, she went to China, took a break like during production, and like it's just so
So they're
unprofessional.
incompetent at the end of the day. That's what it is.
Like I said, there are movies out there that are made and completed, and they just don't do anything with it. Like there's movies that are just sitting there, like not just collecting dust. Like they spent money on it, and we're just not going to release it.
And that's
Like,
a horrible. And it must be a horrible
I
experience.
do know from a production standpoint, one of the things I know is there was a guy I worked with, the thing I PA'd on actually, he had a film that he had made and he had gotten a big budget for it and everything. And like he had investors and whatever else, and he had it finished, it was complete and it was ready to be distributed. But the distributors weren't offering even like what he had spent initially on the project. So he wasn't able to sell it because the investors weren't having it. They were like, no, if you're not going to get it sold for the amount we paid, then we don't want it to be sold to that person. And then because it was taking so long, it just ended up in production hell. And then he couldn't get it released. So then the investors, were pissed. But it was just like he spent too much money on something that wasn't going to be offered enough to make up for it because he didn't really know what he was doing because that was one of his first films.
And that always
And
sucks.
so I
but
think
that's
that
the
kind of
reality.
stuff happens a lot where people don't realize certain things like that. And it just gets in like different reasons for things not to be released or different reasons. It also could be that they're just waiting around to see if I don't know, if they want to like.
Also, what happens is when there is a script or a song, right? I agree with the fact that the musician was asking to call back her song, right?
Yeah.
And what usually happens is that for a script and for the songs, there is a option. They option it out, saying that you have 2 years to make this movie. if you don't make this movie, I have the right to get back the script.
Yeah,
Same
that's what I
thing
was
holds
saying.
for
Most likely that's in
right,
most
and that's part of
contracts.
that is in the contract. The optioned out phase or the time period should be there in the contract, whether it's a musician or a composer, and they have, if it is not released and if it's not gone into distribution, they have the right to take that creative content back, and
Yeah.
that should be in the
And
that
if
should
that
be in the
wasn't in
contract.
the contract, that is a lesson for her to always fight for that later. So
Well, it's
yeah, it's
not
an
a-
unfortunate thing and it sucks. And I'm
it's
glad
not
that she got it. That's what matters, is that she got it. But at the
So
end of
so
the
what
day,
happens is usually you go like a blanket contract. Blanket contract will not really address those. You have to get a lawyer to to customize your contract to the way you want it to,
Yeah.
because you're the originator of the creative content,
I mean,
and
not always,
you
right?
get to
Like
dictate.
if you communicate with the production and like, hey, I
If
would
you
like
know what you want, but still you have to get it written in a way that's going to legally.
Right, because see what happens in script, right? The script writers basically are going into the market to get their script kind of greenlit, right? Or
Yeah.
basically get the script accepted. So they are going into the contract with some big studios, and when they go into contract with a big studio, you have to really say, okay, I'm optioning this out for 2 years. If you don't make it, I get back the script, and you don't no longer are part of the owner of the script.
I
So
feel like
that
I feel
holds.
like if it's a couple things that you want on in your contract, that might be easier than a bunch of things, especially now with so many resources. Like we created our contracts studying other templates and wording and stuff like that. And when some people actually came to us and were like, hey, can I get this changed or that changed, just because it was a blanket contract and there was stuff in there that we were like, oh, this isn't necessary, or this, in this particular case,
Right.
that we had to change. But because there are resources out there, if it's like one or two things, it's a lot easier to find the wording for it than multiple things. Then then I feel like
Right. So what happens is
It
when
also depends on how much money's on the line.
and also how famous the project becomes, right? So because what happens is, like, if you have your creative content in some project and the project is going nowhere, then there's no issue. But if the project is going somewhere, then there is a monetization aspect of it. And if you don't have it in a contract, then you're basically screwed, because you
that's
didn't
why a lot of actors that's why a lot
Right.
of
So
actors
what
are
happens?
complaining about pay, because they're like, well, yeah, we're
Yes,
getting paid
because
500 a day, but it's
right,
also we're
because
paying for managers and lawyers and stuff like that.
right, because the lawyers and the managers are not the managers, but the lawyers basically know what's going on in the industry. So if you write a contract with the help of a lawyer, he knows exactly how to represent you.
Yeah.
But if you don't do it, then the studio system, or whoever the producer director is, he's just going to do it his own way and to his own advantage.
Especially
So
in
that's
smaller
something.
productions, there's not really much you can do to fight
Right.
back non-union and
Right.
stuff like that.
So contract is the most important thing, binding between you as a creative artist and whoever is taking your stuff. So that's, you need to pay attention to that, I think.
I might
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I
recommend
have.
I might recommend before you guys start on contracts, maybe having a call or a conversation, Zoom meeting, what be it, with the producers, with the director, and be like, hey, before you guys write up the contracts or before we start signing anything, I would like these are my terms, these are the things, if you want us to work together, because you're still in the process of hiring. So you'd be like, hey, these are my terms, these are my things. Because since they're writing up the contract for you and you haven't been like assigned to it yet, there's still time to add those things. So if they're a production company worth their salt, they would be able to at least add those minimal things. If it's something complex, then maybe it would be a little harder. But if it's something as simple as, hey, I want a limit of 1 year for you guys to hold this song, and if it's not released within a year or 2 years, I get to release it on my album. I get to perform it,
Yeah, but it just also depends on how much money's on the line and all of that too, because if you have money on the line, obviously you want to make sure everything is legally locked tight in that contract, to make sure it's
Exactly.
all on your side and it's not like the wording is going to be accepted and all of this other stuff is going to be, and it's not just going to be dismissed because it's not exactly the way it should
Well,
be.
that's why you read through it, and if you can, get legal counsel. I know that for the first consultations, most of them are free, depending on the lawyer you get. So if it's something like that, maybe like, hey, you can get someone to look over it for a few minutes and just make sure. I don't know.
Probably not.
Well,
But
and
at
here's the thing too, like at the end of the day, if you're selling your work and stuff, I mean, you could always, like, if you get frustrated enough, couldn't you, like, just like with the song, like she could just be like, you know what, you're right, keep the song and then go and become an engineer.
Yeah, but
And
we're,
just be
we're
like,
talking
well, you're
about
never
like
gonna see.
like a bunch of other things in this context. I feel like it does very, very much. If you can afford a lawyer, that is an investment that I feel like is definitely worth it, even if it's just for 1 hour to look over the documents for you, you know? It's definitely an investment worth making. Unfortunately, not everyone has, especially in the beginning in the indie scene, has that luxury. So, like I said, if you can negotiate as much in the beginning, read through it, and if you feel and compare it to other contracts as well, because there's so much stuff online now. We found so many templates of different types of contracts and stuff, and compare it and see if you are allowed to say no to something. It might be difficult. It might be like, man, like I wanted to work on this project, or man, I needed this paycheck or whatever. But if you don't feel secure in your agreement, you have the right to say no. And sometimes it's worth it.
So here's the thing.
Yeah.
About this whole initial conversation was about this girl that had their song and she gave it to the film and then they're not using it. So that's something that was overlooked. And because of that, if you can't afford it and you want to make sure everything's good on your end, then definitely get a lawyer, even if you feel like the contract's good, because you might overlook something. You might not think that they're not going to use it. You might not think that they're going to take 5 years to distribute this film, or they're just never going to release it. You might just be like, oh, cool, they're using my song and they're paying me for it. That's awesome. And then, I'm going to get exposure from this and I get paid and I'm finally putting my song in a movie. And so then you do that. But if you overlook the fact that, oh, if they don't release it, then I don't get access to it, which happened in this instance, that is something that wouldn't have happened if she had hired a lawyer to look over it, if she had had the money. But if she's getting paid so little, it might not have even been worth it. So it just depends on how much that creative content that she created, the song, is worth it for her to try to secure everything and make sure it's all
And
good to
that's,
go.
and that's my point. If you're if you're a huge production company and you're coming in for like one small song and you're purposely trying to, they could, I mean, I don't think it would happen, but there are cases where like a huge person could come in and just steamroll somebody. And even if they got a lawyer, they could steamroll them and the lawyer if they really wanted to, and somebody had like.
But that's the thing. We're talking about smaller productions. We're talking about these
I would think that
different
that's
examples.
pretty
And in
much
these
it,
ones, more often than not, they're not going to be trying to take your blood. They're not going to be trying, because at the end of the day, it's not worth it. It's not worth the trouble. It's not worth the hassle. It's not worth the effort. So
trust me.
they will.
I've been on productions where like small productions, and it's some of them get kind of violent. It gets kind of serious. But as far as this artist goes, this isn't a learning curve for her. She's signed, so she's covered. Her label covering all of that. This is not a learning curve for her. This is I let you have the rights to this song. This is a learning curve for the filmmakers because they took too long. That's where I'm getting.
Exactly.
This is no, you should have made the movie. You should have did your end of the contract.
And now you're suffering the consequences for it.
The filmmaker need to have that in mind, that you may be getting all these rights and copyrights to music, but then you actually have to do the other part of it and actually go through with it, because then you could also get in trouble on the other side of that as well.
Yeah, you
Exactly.
That and have to start over. Yeah, definitely.
That's why the filmmaking is a time pressure, time period driven fact. And
And
you
I,
need to really make sure that, okay, you finish your project within a time. And also, I want to add another thing is that, you need to be represented. In Hollywood, what happens is you got to have a manager. If you're a creative artist, you got to have a manager who basically has links with the studios and the lawyers, and he sets up things for you. And big
Yeah.
studios usually don't really even want to work with you unless you have a manager. They don't really like independent creative artists just for this reason, because it gets into litigation later at a later point. So
yeah, it's
the
much
manager is
better.
the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the manager is the one who's basically taking care of all this.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to invest in your craft in the beginning. Do
Right.
as much as you can to learn and grow, of course, and know the people you're working for and have to take care of your own, cover your own back. But constantly saving up a little bit of money to be like, you know what, I'm going to save up and get a manager. I'm going to save up and get a lawyer. I'm going to,
Yeah.
have those things taken care of, because it is investing in your craft. It is investing in your career to have those things.
Right. Like, for actors, I think what happens is the manager basically schedules you to go to auditions, right?
Yep.
And he basically works with you after the audition to get the contracts with the filmmakers or the studios to have you cast it. So like that, I think there is also like representation from CAA or the creative agencies, which basically creative artist agencies, which basically go through that process of signing up the creative artists through their managers or
Yep.
the
To make
independent
sure they're
managers.
best represented and make sure that they have the best deal because they get a percentage of that deal. So they want it to be the best they can be.
Right. Yeah. So so that's the manager kind of plays even if you are an independent filmmaker. If you go through some, there may be some auditions that you may be doing, and if you do posting on the auditions, the managers sometimes come and contact you saying that, okay, I have so and so person who wants to come to the audition, and so you're basically dealing directly with the manager. Sometimes you don't even know who the art. I mean, you know who the artist is, but they send you the headshot, but and the CV, but you're not really talking to her or him until they show up for audition. So that's the right representation, and usually I think it works out in the long run as to how you get to deal with this creative artist safely and from a long run perspective.
Right.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I think it's just good practice to always just do the best business that you can. And I mean, yes, people can, even if you had a lawyer, even if you did everything right, things can still sometimes go wrong. But as long as you're going at everything properly, then that's the only thing you can control.
Right.
Yes.
Yep. So basically, if you're the one that's the creative, you just want to make sure that you have a good contract that represents you. If you don't have the ability to get a manager or to afford a lawyer, then just look over that contract. Anything you don't understand, look up, see if you can find an answer, and then or just discuss it with the production. If nothing else, try to discuss it with the production of what each thing means, so that you're just both in agreement with everything. And then set your terms, try to think of all the things that might go wrong, and then try to see if you can put that into your contract. If you are able to get a lawyer, so they can look it over, an entertainment lawyer can look it over and let you know if it represents you well or if they're leaving anything out. And then of course, if you're able to get like Vish said, to get a manager, and then they can represent you and they can always be looking out for your best interest, because your best interest is their best interest as your representative.
That makes sense. Yeah, in business, in whatever, it's good. You're definitely right. And to have people that, sometimes it's good to get a lawyer. Sometimes it's good to just read the contract to be like, okay, this looks.
I will say, however, when shopping around for managers, because you're like their best, sometimes they care more about their best interest. So you also have to negotiate fees and rates, and of course, sometimes you won't have much of an option, and you'll have to give them a pretty high rate of what you make. but just remember to put that in your budget and be realistic, and don't take the first thing that comes to you. Shop around, because there are cases of managers taking advantage of young people in the industry as well to take
That's
a huge cut of it.
Yeah, if you have.
Yeah,
good
what I meant by
people-
best
Notorious.
interest is like once you have that contract with them, then they are going to try to get you the most money and you the best representation because they will make more profit
Oh,
off
yeah.
of you
And,
making more
and
profit.
sometimes,
But that initial contract with them is obviously
Yeah.
going to be something you have to look into.
but you also have to consider that sometimes giving them the 25% might be worth it for the first few years if they're getting you good stuff, if they're getting your name out there, you're getting paid a little bit less, and then you can switch representation. That's another thing. Sorry, honey, continue. I just
Or
wanna
like
get
if you like the people that you, if you are lucky enough to have like really good people that you work with, keep them. That's my.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
talking about
Like
if
if you
you
work, never diss a good thing. So if you were working very well with.
I'm talking about if you don't, though.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm just saying like on the other side too, because I've seen it too where people are so easy to switch. Like, oh, that person gets like that manager's better because they're getting their people a little bit more than mine. I mean, I don't push that on anybody too, because it's like if you've got a good thing, I say keep it. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like that's a creative choice that each individual person would have to make, and not creative,
That's
but
true. That's
that's a
true. But
business
like,
choice that each person would have to make because it is a gamble
Right,
to
so
work with
some-
someone new and everything. But
Yeah, like sometimes managers, have a lot of people under them, and that could be a bad thing. But that could also be a good thing because he has very good links in the studio system where he can place people. But
That's
there
true.
may be some managers who only have 15 people and they represent them very well. So it could
Exactly.
go both ways, right? But you have to
Yeah.
be like do the due diligence to basically figure out finding a manager is not an easy thing because as Sarah
And in the
mentioned.
beginning, you're like I
Right.
said, you're gonna have to be humble, and you're gonna have to maybe give them a little more than you would like, and then once you are bigger, you can renegotiate your terms. But yeah, let's continue because I feel like we flew off topic a little bit.
What else do we have to cover tonight? Because I do.
just
need to-
building sets.
Oh, building sets. Okay. All right. About how much
Yep.
longer?
So let's just go ahead and begin. Well, does anyone else have any comments about the film soundtrack or any of that stuff before we move on?
All right, can I go back to the beginning because you had addressed it as soundtrack. So in the descriptions you kind of give were like for sound score. So know that there is a difference between an OST, original soundtrack, and a movie score. And then so a score is more or less the background music, like you were saying. It's usually done by a composer who watches the movie and they make the music based off of the scene by scene. They create whatever emotion they want with their music. And then you have the soundtrack with a hired artist, like to give you an example, Ghostbusters, Ray Parker Jr. Everybody knows the Ghostbusters theme song. That's part of the soundtrack, but nobody knows who the actual composer is, who does the actual score in the actual movie. So a lot of times you won't really hear a soundtrack in a movie. You've heard it in movies, like they'll put it in there sometimes, like in there's certain movies like the Rocky movie or the Ghostbuster movie, that have like montages that uses songs in there, but they're normally not used for the scene. That's usually the score. So just know that there's a difference between soundtrack and score. Now it's easy to say, oh, technically it's all music. So when you say score, you can say music or background music, but just know that like when you hear music like something like maybe a song from Eminem or something like in the Venom soundtrack, that's different from the score. If you were to ever hear a song in a movie, a lot of times it's either in a montage or it's like suggested in the movie. Like you'll hear like elevator music or a ringtone or like a speaker's playing or something. That's their way of incorporating songs and music into from a soundtrack into the movie. But like 9 times out of 10, you're not going to hear an actual song in a movie. It's usually like a score done by a composer or something like that. So just understand that there's a difference between, because I also heard somebody suggested like, oh yeah, we use this song for this or that. I mean, yes and no. You could put a song there in a scene, but a lot of times it's going to be done by like a composer of some sort. It's not going to be like something from a soundtrack or anything like that.
Right.
And if you are looking for a sound, like a lot of times where a lot of people go wrong is like when they're looking for the soundtrack, they're like, oh, let me get a song that has these words in it because that's the name of the movie or that's what the script is about. Don't do that. Like you have to actually ask yourself the question, what works for this movie? You don't have to say, oh, well, this song has this name and it has these words in there, so I have to use it. No, you have to ask yourself, and you really, really have to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, like, does this music go good with what it is that I'm editing here? Because like I think anime, for instance, when anime first came out, it was horrible because when they translated it into the English and they dubbed it in English and they would put like American soundtracks over it and it didn't really work the same because
Oh yeah.
it's just terrible. Like what band is that they would always use? Disturbed. They'd always put Disturbed over Dragon Ball Z, you know. It's like it doesn't, I get what they're trying to do, but it's just not working. So like you have to understand, you have to really, really dig deep. And that's the problem with a lot of movies is that people can't let their personal style choice go. Like I can see the editor now, like, oh man, this is my favorite song, so I'm gonna put it in every movie that I do because this, you know, that's not how it should be. Like it should be
Right.
like what's best for you. You have to let your personal style go. Like you can listen to whatever music you want. If you listen to grudge rock, cool, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put grudge rock in every movie that you edit or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? Like that doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily mean
definitely. Yeah, you always want to do what's best for the story, the emotional moments within the scene, and whatever's best, whatever plays well and integrates with that film, instead of
Yeah.
just using something that is
I mean,
cool or sounds good, or like we were saying earlier about the epic music and the videos, stuff like
yeah,
that.
other ways of integrating your personal style into your film without saying like this music has got to go here. Like take Batman, anything Tim Burton does, like he's got all these like symbolic dark figures and statues in his movies and stuff, but like the music is still like done by an orchestra. Like he still keeps it traditional to the film and it still like complements, like when he did Edward Scissorhands and stuff, like you would never think like that a movie that looked like that would have like a score that sounded like that or
Yeah.
even bad. Like you would never think that, but it does. Like you have to ask yourself the question, like, does this actually fit the theme that I'm doing and what I'm doing here? So you have to let your personal preference go and just do what's best for the film.
Yep, I agree completely. That's pretty much across the board. Always just go with whatever's best for the story and the film, and not just whatever looks cool, sounds cool, or what you like personally, like that. Yeah, I agree with that. All right, so moving on to building sets. So building a set, this is like going in with location scouting in a way. If you're going to build your set instead, you need to have a space where you can put the set walls and everything to create that. So you might still need to find a location. If you have a location already that you're going to use, maybe you're going to use somebody's garage or you're going to use a basement or something, and you're just going to put some walls up around there. That's great. But it does take up a lot of space. So you do want to keep in mind how much space that might take up and that you might need to get a location for it. While building a set might be costly and time consuming, it can offer greater flexibility than a traditional location. You can take something called a wild wall, which if you look at this image, you can see there's like 3, maybe 4 different wall panels in there. Well, there's probably more panels than that, but any of those panels will be able to be moved. So if the camera wants to get an angle from the right side looking at the door, all they have to do is move those walls out of the way, and then they can have the camera right there looking directly at the door. And
If you guys look at the behind the scenes of Haunting of Hill House, that one shot that he did in episode 5 around the funeral home was basically using those walls, and it was one shot. So like it's really cool to see up like an aerial view of the camera moving, and with it the walls would move with it so that it would go around, and it looked really good even if they were moving walls.
okay, anyway.
No, I just
So-
wanted to point that out because you're talking about moving walls, and like that's a good example of it if you want to like look at it and see how that would work, you know.
Well, I was
in the
that,
shoot.
yeah, that is technically something you can do. You can move it in camera, but I was just meaning like for an angle when you're setting up and you want a different angle. A traditional location, you're not going to be able to get it from each direction unless you're like in the actual room, which is going to limit the kind of lens you might need to use or limit the different angles you might be able to film at. But using these like a location, like a building a set and using these wall panels, these flats, you're going to be able to move the walls out of the way when you want and film it from any direction, or just have the lights. These walls don't go all the way up. So you have the ability to put a light on a C-stand or something, or hang it from the ceiling and have it shine down from an angle that you otherwise wouldn't be able to in a traditional location. So it does offer some flexibility in those areas. And that's why a lot of these big studios use sets, because it gives more creative freedom, but it does take a lot more time and money to build and to dress the set and furnish it and decorate it and all that other stuff. So keep all those things in mind whenever if you are considering making a set for your project. But you can also decide where the windows and walls are, so things really fit into the idea you had in your head, the location that you had in your head when you were writing it or when you were reading it over the script. You can have an idea of how long that hallway needs to be or where that window needs to be, so that that moment where the guy passes by the window happens at the right instance, and you don't have to rely on a location and finding the right location to have that long hallway with the window at the end. You can just create it from scratch, which is always a good thing if you're able to afford it. So there are these wooden panels called flats, and as you can see, we're looking at the back of them. They're attached to those wooden frames. That's what the back is. It's all those wooden frames, and that's to give it stability. And these are the ones that are used for the walls. They most come in like either 4 foot wide by 10 foot high, or 4 foot by 8 foot, 4 foot wide by 8 foot high, 8 foot tall, sorry. So if you're buying get them in bulk, you'll usually get those sizes, and then you can just line them up as you're creating the wall panels, and you can create a room. That way you have 4 feet by 8 feet or 4 feet by 10 feet, and you just keep making another panel until you have it big enough to whatever size you need for your space, for your project. As you can see on the frame, it looks a little bit like a shelf design where there's different parts going up and down, vertical and horizontal, so that it makes the just to give it the most stability. Each square of each frame, the standard guy, the one who was more professional, he was saying each square of the frame, they usually have it be like 2 feet by 2 feet apart. So there'll be each 2 feet down, you'll put another horizontal, what is it called? What do you call that? Toggle, I think it's called. Yeah, toggle. Those are called toggles, the ones in the in between. So each 2 feet down, you'll put another toggle in, and then you'll just keep doing that all the way through. And each 2 feet across, you'll put another toggle in, and then you'll just do that all the way across like that. And it makes it all the same size, same length apart.
Do you get them ready made, or they come, you have to make them?
You have to make them. I mean, you might find some that are pre-made, but they're probably going to be costly. But usually what
Yeah.
you'll do is you'll buy the panels.
Wood from the
What was
yeah.
that?
Buy the wood from Home Depot or something.
Yeah, something like that. And you'll just buy like the wood panels, the front part, like right here. You'll just buy individual sizes. Like I was saying, like the 4 feet wide, 10 feet up, or 4 feet wide, 8 feet tall. Those panels, you'll just buy a bunch of those, and you'll put them on the front of your frame, and then you'll have that frame on the back, like right here, where you have it for stability.
All right, and the windows, I think you get the windows frame and then put it up there also, right?
Yeah, you'd have to like cut a hole first and like figure out where you want it, and then you would put the actual, if you're putting an actual window in, you'd put it in to that space. You have to buy that separately, which is why, you know, windows will be more costly, and they'll probably a little bit more work, because you have to figure out how you're going to keep that panel from falling over, and you can't have a wooden frame there. You can't have a beam holding it up because it's going to be in the shot. So you need to have it structurally sound. So having a bunch of windows is a bit harder to do, but it is possible. You just have to know what you're doing and make it stable. Once the panels are in place, the seams are plastered and sanded to create smooth surfaces. That way it doesn't look like individual pieces of wood. It looks like one wall. So if you look right here, that guy's standing right there, a few feet over, you can see that it's possibly where that panel ended, but they sanded it down, they plastered it up and sanded it down, and then they painted over it to make it look like it's one wall instead of a bunch of different panels put together. And then they add, like, you know, texture and dimension are added to give it more of a real feel instead of it just looking like a very flat wall. Like in this, they put some brick and attached it, and something on the top, that little rail, just to give it a little bit more dimension and make it look a little bit more like a real thing and less 2D. And then, you know, painting and the design and wallpaper are all done as well. Someone was saying that when they bought their stuff, it was about $38 per flat. And that would be the cost of the panel with the framing and the jack that holds up the back of it. There are these things called, like, I think they call them Luan or Luan. And those are the wood types that the professionals say they use most of the time because they're very thin. They're not really made for like actually staying up for a long time and like for real walls. They're just used for these filmmaking walls and stuff like that because they're super thin, so they're not really that sturdy. But they do what's needed, and they do hold up well for the projects. And you can use them over and over again, but eventually they will probably wear down and break apart. I think a cheaper version is also what I think is called masonite, which is I believe it's a little bit thicker and it's not as sturdy as the Luan, but it's a bit cheaper, I believe. And that's what some of the more independent people we were looking at were talking about. They bought a bunch of these and put them to the back and did the same thing that we saw on those other professional made walls to make these flats. You're also going to need some tools though. Like you can't just, obviously you can't just buy the wood. If you're trying to make a set, you're going to need things like 2x4s, 1x3s. Like you would need like a hammer, a drill, a nail gun, tape measure, vice grip, 1.5-inch nails, 2.5-inch screws, power saw.
You would need a trade. You would need a trade. If you're not a carpenter, you can
right. you need a carpenter for sure.
Yeah, you can hurt yourself, yeah. So you have to, and then also understand, like you're talking about, like even though these aren't completed walls, you're pretty much building another section. Like I don't know anybody. I mean, you could probably build one of these sets in a garage or something. But, these sets are usually designed to be in some kind of studio. But like if you're thinking about doing this in your garage, you have to look into your state or county's building code or house code or something like that. Because I do know for my house, there can only be so many. Like I couldn't take my garage and turn it into another bedroom. I'd have to like call the city up and let them know about the construction, because that adds another bedroom. So that there's actually like state laws to prevent you from actually going about and doing some of these things, even though you're not really.
Where do you live again?
I live in Calhoun
Live in
County,
DC.
Maryland, in the
He
DC
lives in
area.
Maryland?
In DC.
Oh, he lives in DC.
Maryland, DC, Virginia, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Are you guys even aware of that?
No, yeah. I just know that like some places have more regulation than others. And I know DC might have a lot more.
Even worse in DC, the city areas, DC, New York, it's even worse because they really want, because like the space there is so limited. But like if you live out, like you guys live out in VA, I'm not necessarily sure how they roll, but like if you build, like when you go and you buy property, you build a house, you get your who is it? The guy who builds the blueprints for the house. I forgot the name, the title of it, but
Architect.
architect that builds a house. You know, you say how many bedrooms, and he'll go and build it. But if you want to add, it's not that it costs money. It's just that there's certain, like every state has like you know how there's like the building code where you can only have so many people in a building at a certain amount of. It's just similar to that, where it's like your house, like depending on how many bedrooms you have, or you know what I mean. It has to be listed. Like you can't just build an extra room. You have to go through the county and the state through that first. Like you can't just build additions to your house, even if you own the property. Like there's certain things that you have to get approved first. So
No, you
yeah,
just have to make sure that it's structurally sound and that it's not interfering on the other person's property as well. So yeah,
that too.
that's basic stuff.
Yeah, there's that too.
Common sense.
I don't know. I'm not too familiar with the laws and the rules of it, but I do know like if it becomes like, so for right now it looks like you have 3 walls, but if you have like a 4th wall, I think it's like it becomes another room or something like that, and then you have to report it. But you know, nobody's gonna really know if it's in your garage, but it's just
Especially
the
if it's a temporary
Right.
wall. It's nothing that you're gonna keep up forever or you're gonna use.
But that is something to keep in mind. That is an interesting point to make, is that just keep in mind that you might not be able to just do it. And you especially won't be able to just go out in your yard and do whatever you want because you have neighbors and things like that. So you do want to keep all that in mind if you're trying to do this. But I have seen people that, you know, they've made their own sets, they're making it in their garage, and they don't do construction. They just kind of learned it on the go. And like, be careful. I'm not saying go out and do it. I'm not saying that you'll be able to do it right or anything, but it is possible, and people have done it, and it's not completely difficult. Once you watch some videos, it looks not too hard. It just takes some time to get used to all the tools and everything, and you need to be a little handy, but you always want to be safe and make sure you know what you're doing and not just like having a chainsaw and running around with it and doing whatever you want. Make sure you're doing it all safely and you know, paying attention to all the different things to make sure that you're not going to hurt yourself or cut off your finger on accident.
Yeah, like I was just bringing it up because we're talking about like film and film productions. I want people to understand that aspect of it is a completely different, like it's carpentry. Like you can go to school, it's a completely different thing. So like you're learning a completely different trade when you're talking about, you know, buying saws, and just have that understanding that you're kind of going in that. And that's one of the most intricate things about film, is that it kind of incorporates like other trades, you know. It goes
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I find like. Yeah, that's what I like.
yeah. So just
There's
I have
just
that.
so much to it.
We're no longer in film anymore. We're talking about carpentry and building walls and plaster and drywall and stuff like that. Completely different thing. And there's a whole different degree programs dedicated to that type of work.
Yeah,
So
it's good that you brought it up. Of course, there are like, it really varies on what like, yeah, definitely get someone who's skilled, know what you're doing, be safe. Make sure you're under code and regulations so you don't get in trouble later. It is good that you brought those things up. And they are pretty common sense. Like there are rules like that in Brazil too. Like my dad built another house on top of my grandma's, and he had to like inform the city and stuff like that.
I will say it's still filmmaking because these walls are obviously not going to be what you can use in an actual house. It's not going to be something that you can actually use. It's literally just made for these kinds of things, for these projects. They're weak, but they are sturdy enough to make that room, but they're light enough to be moved around, so that you can move them around for filming and everything. So they are actually used for filmmaking. I would say it falls more on the lines of like making props, which is also very, hands-on and craft like. And it requires these same kind of tools, some things, certain props and stuff like that. But it is still a part of this kind of filmmaking thing, but it is a different set of skills, of course.
Yeah, and that's why I said it really varies on what you're doing, because there were videos of people who were like stapling the wood together and building up the whole thing. But there are also people who are just like lifting them and then painting them and using them for that scene and moving them around and then done. So sometimes it can fall under the.
I think it also depends on like how complex you're trying to make it. If you're trying to make a 3-room or 4-room wall place, I think it's a bit easier than trying to make, like something with stairs or something with a certain design. If you're just trying to make a room in general, then I think it's a bit easier to get the concept down if you're really needing to make it or figure out how to get it done. But anyway, so if you are going to make one of these kinds of frames, you would start with the bottom and the top rails. You would run the length of the entire frame, whatever the panel is that you're using. Run the length of the entire frame from top, going horizontally on the top and bottom for the rails. And then you would put the side rails on each side of the panel. So this guy, he's at the left side of that rail for the one going vertically. And then on the other side, we're seeing the vertical one on the right side. And at those other ends would be the top and the bottom. Top and the bottom need to go all the way across. Some people will put them in the middle, and they say that that is not good because if you're dragging those, if you're moving them around, it's not going to be as stable and as sound as if you put just an entire bottom piece and then have the side rails attached to that bottom piece from the top. So let me see if I can explain. Do you guys get what I mean? So you want the bottom rail to run the entire length of the panel, and then you want the side rail to start from the width wherever that bottom rail ends, going up the side to wherever that top rail begins, so that the side rails are in the middle and not the bottom and top rails, because the bottom and top rails need to run across the entire length to make it a bit more sturdy, especially when you're moving it around. Then you can just slide it across one board instead of it being attached on each side and it's running across all 3 boards. That's going to make it fall apart a lot easier. So you start with the bottom and the top, put those there. You have your frame there, so like the width, and then the chainsaw would be to cut it. Not chainsaw, this just the saw would be to cut the wood in the width you need, and then you would put the bottom and the top, and then you put the sides, and you nail those together. And then you have these pieces in the middle, these toggles in the middle that go horizontally or vertically across. And this guy's doing it pretty much how the professional person was doing it in the video, where it's like about 2 feet width and height. So they're all equal in height and width, and they're attaching the whole thing so that the whole thing's going to attach to that panel, and it's all going to be very sturdy and able to be used for that film wall.
So do they have like the extenders on the sides, which extend beyond the frame for stability?
I
what I mean?
haven't
The
seen it. Like I've seen them use it just like this, where it runs the length of the panel, but that's it.
I see.
It
Just the
they
whole
don't
frame
usually
itself.
use it to go above or below it, just so that it's a little more. If they're showing that top of the wall, they can put something. They can put a wall over it or like a ceiling, like another wall panel over it to make it look like a ceiling. If they want to show the top of the house, but if they had stuff sticking out the sides, it would make it very clear that it's a set if they were showing that angle. And I believe that's why they do it, but I'm not completely sure on that. But it is very
So what I
symmetrical.
meant was on the at the bottom, like the base on the two sides. I mean, it probably won't show up because one is towards the camera and another is hidden behind the back wall.
Yeah, right.
So
So
it's
this
more
side that we're
stable.
seeing, this side that we're seeing right now, he's putting the wall over it. This wall part would be the side we see, and the other side would be the side in the back where you don't see it.
Right.
Yeah. So you won't see the framing. That's just for stability. But the wall itself will just look like a flat wall, like you would see in any regular room.
Yeah. So what I was wondering was that the beginning of the wall, right, the sheet which goes on the frame. So there is no extension to this side, right, towards us. There is no extension of that base bottom part of the frame. I guess it just ends at the wall ending.
Right. No, it's mostly
what-
just symmetrical and made to look like a triangle. Not a triangle, a rectangle, pretty much. Like they
So
have it, like if you look at it, it's pretty even. And then when he puts this board down, even if it's not completely even, what they were saying is they always line it up on one side because you can always cut off the other side that's sticking out farther. But you do want it to kind of line up as best as it can so that you can put these next to each other and they're not going to have these weird gaps.
Oh, okay.
Or you know what I mean? Like nothing will be sticking out because you want to put them next to each other to make a bigger wall since they're only 4 feet wide.
I see. Extendable. So the only support that you have is on the backside with those L frames, right? On the which hold up.
Right. And in the
walls.
front, it would just look like a wall and you just kind of stick it together, but you wouldn't have it any support coming from the front. It would all be coming from the back.
I see. Sounds good. Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And that's just to add that structural integrity to make sure it doesn't fall apart and then it stands up. And then what they also might sometimes use is something called muslin cloth, and they put that over the thing. I think I had that. So it looks kind of like this top left image. It's like this very thin cloth that they put over the wood and they tug it really tight and then they staple it to it. And then they use that to paint over it. Instead of just painting the wall directly, they might do something like that. It just gives it a little bit more dimension without making it look like it doesn't stick out anywhere. That's why they make it so tight so that it still looks like a flat surface, but they make it do that so that it has a little bit more of a dimensionality to it, a little bit more of a 3D look instead of it just being that flat, super flat 2D wall, because most of the time you're not going to see that in a lot of places. V is asking if this is an option for someone shooting on one side of the room, would that be best, allowing maybe an entry door or holes to run any cables through for equipment, like the frame placing needing to be close to outlets? It's an option for someone shooting. Yeah, so if you're shooting on one side of the room, what's usually going to happen is you're going to have like a set kind of like this. You're going to have about 3 walls. If you need a 4th, you'll bring it in later. And that's what's called, like, I think they called it wild away walls. So you'll wild it away, which means you'll just take it out of the way, or you'll put it in the way if you're trying to shoot from that direction. But usually what you'll do is you'll have 2, maybe 3 walls, and then you'll have all your equipment on the other side. Lighting maybe coming from above or right over the sides of the walls into the room. And you'll have your camera looking in on that side, seeing the set.
There are no sheetrocks on these walls, correct?
These walls, I'm not exactly sure. I can't really see it. I think in the back, there's probably a bunch of it, but on the sides, it probably has support on some other direction. I can't really see. But it does have that framing. If you look at the wall all the way to the left, I'm sure the back of these walls look like that. I think it's because it has that doorway in the window that they don't have those, the jacks holding it up. But I'm sure on that wall all the way furthest from camera with the window shade, that one probably has all of the beams that are holding it up at the sides. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure for this one. That is a little interesting. Because yeah, usually they'll have like this in this picture thing to the right that's holding it up, making it sturdy. You know, that's sticking out at an angle, and then having that other part that gives it a little bit of a base. Oh, here we go. This is better. Something like that. That way it's leaning back just ever so slightly so that it's leaning back this way. And then they also put stuff like sandbags. You can see the sandbag on the
right.
second one. That way it gives it a little
Hold
bit
it up.
more weight, stability.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I found it super interesting. Like a lot of the videos in the syllabus, if you look at them and if you look at them for this week, the ones for building sets, it's interesting just to watch. Like to me, it was interesting just to watch how they do it and how they get it done, because there's so much that goes into just like building a little tiny room. It's pretty crazy, but it's also very interesting to see like how it looks at the end, especially with all the amounts of like paint and stuff that they do to it. I think it's really cool.
Almost like that show that comes on TV, right? Makeover. Is it the Makeover, or they
Which
go?
one? There's a million.
Yeah, the two brothers who kind of
There's
two brothers who kind
something
of go
that
and
Chris-
rebuild the houses.
I love the Property
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking
Property
about.
Brothers, yes. There's like they have 3 different shows too. Like just them, I think have 3 different shows. Or used to have.
So if you've ever taken a theater class, like before I went to college, I took a class in theater, and they have a whole section, like they have walls and stuff like that, but they have like a whole room dedicated to like furniture and props and stuff like that. And you kind of get a little bit of experience of it's a little bit different because a lot of that stuff is going to be on stage, and then but sometimes like some of these walls, like you have to figure out ways if you're going to have like practicals in your set.
Mhm.
You have to figure out ways of getting electricity through and whatnot. But for theater, it's just mainly like the walls and then the furniture and then whatever props you may have. But I thought it was pretty cool. Like they have a whole like room dedicated towards and it's like that with these studios too. Like they'll have like it'd be like a maze of different rooms and stuff, but it's all in like a gas hanger. And like there's always like a room where they have all this furniture just lying around, and like they'll just go and it'll be the same set, but they'll just go take all the furniture out and put new furniture in and whatnot. And I think that's pretty cool and pretty interesting as well.
Oh yeah, that's always like, it's so interesting to see like how much you can transform something just by changing some of the colors and the furniture, like you said, and just like the layout. Just like maybe moving a wall slightly over here and then changing where the wall is and then adding a different couch, and it's all of a sudden a different room.
Have you
Pretty
seen
crazy. But yeah, one of the videos actually showed like the person was making the wall. I think actually it was this guy that was where is he at? Oh, I don't know. I think it was this guy. No, I think it was this guy. He was making the wall, and then whenever he finished making the wall, he brought it into the room. They were like, they have a studio, and he brought it into the room with all these other walls, and it was kind of like when you're at a store and they have like those posters where you can flip through them to see which poster you like. But it was just a bunch of different wall panels with different sizes and different lengths and different colors on it. Which reminded me of that when you said that, because it was just like a bunch of different walls that they just pull out, like, oh, do we want to this by this, or this, you want a 4x8 that's blue? Here you go, and then just pull it out of that little slot and just
Have
hold
you
a bunch.
them. It was like the main actor was like on this pedestal and it was like rotating, and then like the camera was like following the actor around, and then every time they would turn somewhere behind the camera, they would reset, like they would bring different furniture in, and then the actor would walk into it to look like it was like one continuous shot. And they were just going around, they were going around in clockwise,
Mhm.
and then like every time we would get to a certain point, like they would rearrange the furniture behind the camera. And by the time we got to it, it would be a completely different set. Like, have you seen that video?
Oh, I have, yeah, and it's crazy. Like I think I saw it on Instagram on like one of those filmmaker Instagram things where they were showing that.
Yeah, that is some crazy. And then there's the lighting aspect of it too that goes into that as well. But I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool to see and just like see how you can do it. And it is also a good thing like for transitions, if you're able to pull it off, if you're able to switch the wall fast enough for a transition of a scene without having to like make a cut and fade it together somewhere or seam it together and the edit. Um, if you can just do it on set practically, it actually makes it a very cool shot that a lot of people a lot of filmmakers will notice and think it's really interesting that how you pulled it off and watch that behind the scenes and see. If you're trying to build sets really cheaply, though, you can always check out stuff like Craigslist free in your area. You'd be kind of surprised what people give away. Some of the furniture and stuff I've seen on Craigslist free, I'm like, dang, if I had a big, huge truck, I would come and just take that just because it looks cool and it would be cool to have for later if I had somewhere to store it. So that's always something to think about as well. If you're trying to get the furniture in and you're building a set and you need furniture, but you don't want to buy some, Craigslist free. They always like throw couches out. You can always buy a couch cover, or you can just put something over it to make it look different. Construction equipment as well, or just wood, just general wood that you can use if you're using any kind of like destruction area where maybe some in your scene a tree fell on the house. You just want a few wood chips. People just give that stuff away on Craigslist all the time. And I know there's other sites too, like Facebook does that where they just have like a yard sale, quote unquote, but really it's just a bunch of stuff they put out and said, come take it if you want it. And so just always check those things out if you're trying to do this very cheaply. And as well with like set decorating and things like that, Goodwill and thrift shops are great places to find cheap items for set decoration. You might find some cool lamp or something that you think is really cool, or a poster, or a different kind of frame, like a picture frame that might work in your whatever you're doing. So just keep those in mind if you're going to go out and make your own set. Another interesting thing that we saw that I thought was really cool was there was these people, I'm actually going to show it right now. They made a set out of cardboard. So another more budget friendly than doing it with wood and stuff is you can maybe do it with cardboard and make a set. And it actually didn't look terrible. This is actually it. I thought it looked really good for especially, I didn't even notice it was cardboard unless you like look really close at it. But even those little blue panels on the wall on the right, the stuff in the middle and the stuff to the left, that's all just big pieces of cardboard that they put together. They bent the way they wanted it to be, and they really took their time
Even the signs and stuff,
painting it and everything.
Painted.
Yeah, the signs and everything in here is all just cardboard, and it's made to look like a subway station. And then they just put some green screen in the background, and they added like some subway station footage that they captured. Just the camera guy and one other person. They went out and did that, and then they came back and they in the edit they put that in the background, and then it made it look like the subway station. So that's another really super cheap option if you want to try doing something like that. These are actually the little panels that they used to paint. They just bent the edges a little bit and painted them, and then he showed that like one side of it, because it's cardboard, they have those little seams going across. So one side of it would reflect more light than the other. So they hung it the way that wouldn't reflect light because they want it to look more realistic. So, you'd have to pay attention to a bunch of different things if you're doing something like that. But I just thought it was super interesting that they made an entire set just out of cardboard and made it look real enough to be used on the film set. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I know. Of course, there was a lot of special effects that they also used, like they blended in.
Well, it's
with,
also
like,
about the lighting. It's just color grade and stuff like that to make it,
Yeah.
sometimes you want to hide things, even if it's really high budget, you still want to hide things and not let it be like completely noticeable, because if you pay too close of attention, you'll notice it's a set. But if it's in the background and it's a quick scene and they're paying attention to the story and the character, then it's harder to notice, and people aren't really going to pay that much attention, hopefully, to things unless they really stick out. But if they just kind of blend into the background, then there shouldn't be a reason for them to look at it and pick it out and think something's weird.
But I'm just saying that it was also a mixture of lighting, very a lot of creativity, like holy crap, and some green screen work that they blended together that also made it look more believable. But honestly, I was so impressed at how creative they were, at how like resourceful they were, and how it looked pretty decent. Like I was really impressed. And that just goes to show you that you don't need like a ginormous budget. If you're resourceful enough, if you're willing to try, and people are willing to chip in and do their best. Of course, it's never going to turn out perfect. And like some people might have to suspend their disbelief, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't invest or save up and stuff, but never let that stop you. Pretty much, like try, at least try. Like there are a lot of people nowadays, and that's really frustrating, that are like, oh, if you don't have the man, dude, scrolling through that thing, Brian, got me so, because it was like, oh, if you don't have enough money, then you just shouldn't make anything. And it made me so mad, because I was like, wait,
They're just talking about the actors thing.
Oh,
it made me so freaking mad, because I was like, oh, tell that to someone who's opening a business. You don't make a profit for the first 3 years that you're opening a business. So they just shouldn't ever open anything ever, because it's like, well, if you don't have enough money to put money in and make a profit right away, you shouldn't make anything. No one would ever make anything like that. It's so freaking frustrating that they think that and this is a mindset that's really frustrated me, is that a lot of people in the industry don't treat it like a regular career, like a job, like stuff that takes work. And they think that because it's the industry, it has to be more high budget and magical and easy. And it's just so frustrating.
I wasn't going to say anything because I see that comment a lot. I wasn't going to, but what kind of set me off, kind of triggered me, was she was like, if you're serious about your film. So you're saying that these people that aren't serious, are you saying that I went to film school and I'm not? Because when I was a film student, I couldn't afford to pay anybody, that I wasn't serious at the time, that I wasn't.
Yeah, it's so condescending. It's so freaking. Gosh.
It's like, to me, it sounds like, why don't you tell the volunteer firefighters not to volunteer? Because they're not paying. They're not getting paid either. Everybody.
Yeah, it just screams. It screams privilege and pretentiousness. Honestly, it's just so disgusting. I think it just shows that person has never had to work for anything in their life. That's what it made me think. I'm like, wow, you never struggled, right? You never had to fight for anything. You never had to take jobs that you didn't want to pay the bills. And
we need each other. So my whole thing is like, you as an actor, you have the ability to write, direct, and produce, and even act in your own movie and pay yourself.
Yeah.
How can somebody else pay you? When
yeah, that's the one time I'll use that argument, because I hate that argument. Like, oh, you do better. But in that time, I'll use it. Frick. I'll be like, okay, yeah, you're complaining so much that you're not getting paid for these gigs, and you're saying it's so easy. And
oh yeah, somebody was like, it's somebody was saying in that thread, they were like, an important aspect of filmmaking is learning how to budget and learning how to make money off of your films.
And they teach you that in film school. It's basic or whatever. I'm like, good for you.
They don't teach that.
Good for you that you learned that. Not everyone.
A lot of films don't make money. What are these people talking about?
Yeah, it was just like, and I tried to understand it, because I was telling Code, I was like, well, I can understand some of these people's arguments, because I do understand that being an actor is hard. Living in certain places is hard. You have to pay for managers. You have to pay for lawyers. But at the end of the day, like treating people like trash, that you have a choice. You cannot take that gig if it's not paid and you don't want it. It's your choice. They're not putting a bullet to your head and being like, be a part of my production. even if I don't pay you or else. No, like you have a choice. And at the end of the day, there are passionate people out there that just want to make stuff, that want to get their name out there. And it's hard, dude, so forgive me if people want to try to be resourceful and try to get people who are passionate about it and be like, hey guys, we can't pay that much. This is all we have. But we're trying to do something here. And if you want to be a part of it, great,
Well, here's where I said it's like one of them kind of got in my inbox and was like personally messaging me. I was like, oh,
Okay.
yeah. But I went back and forth with this person too, and they were like, oh, you should learn to pay. And I was like, well, first of all, listen, you're on a group page called DC, Maryland, and Virginia actors and filmmakers and stuff like that. You will never see Spike Lee or Steven Spielberg or Tyler Perry on any one of those group pages because they don't need it. They don't need. Whenever they make a movie, they just, we need actors. Boom, there you go.
And you think that they started with a crap ton of money, that every single filmmaker out there right now started with a shitload of money that they were just willing to throw at a project.
Yeah, I was like, you're on a page that's dedicated to helping struggling actors and struggling filmmakers. And now here you are demanding money on a page that's dedicated for amateurs.
Yeah.
That's my kid. I was like, Spike Lee is not here watching this right now. Steven Spielberg is not here watching. I mean, he could, but they're not because they don't need to be. They're already established. Which means if you're, that means you are established and you are not in a position to demand money.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you're
and
not.
At the end of the day, you can demand, like you can, if you want, if those are your standards, that's okay. But you have no right to go to somebody and say that the fact that they can't afford to pay every single person on the crew is because that they don't care about filmmaking, that they don't take it seriously, that they're not dedicated enough. Like that's just disgusting, man. Like it's okay to have your standards. It's okay to like be like, I will only take paid gigs because that's all I can afford. I need to pay my bills. I would like to. I've worked hard and now I'd like to only take, like, fine, that's your standards. I respect that and I understand that. It's the disrespect that I don't tolerate. It's the putting other people down because you think they owe you something that I don't tolerate. Because at the end of the day, yes, there are a lot of issues in the film industry and there are a lot of things that are taken for granted. I understand that. And I feel that a lot of the people's frustrations come from that. But to take it out on people who are just trying to make stuff and just trying to, put their names out there and help each other and grow together. I feel like that's just gross, dude.
Yeah, it is. It's very gross. It's very disrespecting. It's kind of disgusting in a way because like you're on a page that's there to like help, and communicate. And then I also brought the person who originally posted, and I've seen some of her other posts, and they're very, very kind of like, oh, I've been in the business for such and such and such. Then why are you on this page? Why are you here? Like you don't.
Yeah.
This is wrong, and
if you want to act like you're better than other people, but then beg for like treat other people like trash and say like, oh, why doesn't anyone help me? Why doesn't anyone pay me? Maybe that's why. Maybe because you're likable and you're treating people like trash and you're being condescending.
As if actors were the only ones not getting paid. Talk to the PA, who's
PA's doing fake gigs all the time.
Or the intern. You know what I mean? Like
that's another thing. Like the film industry is the only industry that has unpaid interns. It's not. So that's my frustration. It was that there are people out there that think that, like, there are some people that were contacting us. It's like, oh, what kind of equipment do you guys have? And asked us if we had like this super expensive equipment, and then was like, no, I'm not interested. Oh, are you a part of Clubhouse? Then I'm not interested. It's like the status. You need the status to feel like you are somebody, and that's just. I'm sorry, dude, but you're getting nowhere if that's what you're focusing on. You're never going to make something. You're never going to grow because you're focusing on what you don't have and what's limiting you instead of being like, you know what, we're going to make stuff. I'm going to get my name out there.
We're way off topic.
I'm sorry. I'm
ranting.
ranting. Main point that I wanted to make with this, I'm sorry, was that never let something like budget stop you. If you have a small budget, try to do what you can. Try to look at us, for goodness sake. We went all the way to New Jersey did a 2.5 day production pretty much, with mostly volunteers who were just passionate and who just wanted, to do stuff. That was awesome. And we made something. That's so cool. Imagine what we couldn't have, imagine if we had just said, oh, we don't have enough money, or oh, we don't have enough people, oh, we don't have enough resources.
So let me ask you a question though. Like, on that note, do you think that you could have taken the money that you used for the location and built a set, seeing as you only had 2 pages to shoot?
The location was actually free.
Oh, it was 3 locations. I was gonna say, like, do you think that you could have skipped New York and stayed down here had you had just built a set?
No, the location was free.
No,
and that's
because
the
of our
reason we went to
crew.
New Jersey.
That's why, like, the crew was
And the
up
majority-
there, so that's why.
The
But yeah, I
majority of our
do think for
crew-
like if I'm going to do it, my next project, I do think it would be cheaper to build a set or just to find a location around here and take everyone that I want down here, or just to have people locally that know what they're doing a little better, because just the rates up there are crazy. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and we understand.
I
cost of
don't
living and
think
all
the
that, but
rates
it's
down
just not
here
working
are the
for it
same
right
at
now.
all as the ones up there. And I think there's a little bit more people that are willing to work with you when it comes to like, doing it for less. And I also believe that there's a little bit more of like a passion industry in locations like here where it's not really a big film spot.
Because it's not as money hungry.
It's not as much of a job for everyone. It's more of a hobby or a side project or a hustle maybe, but it's also like a passionate thing they want to do.
So we calculated it, and it might be actually cheaper for us to find a way to get everyone here and rent an Airbnb for them than it would be for us to go back there and do everything again. So that's probably what we might do. Man, I was telling Connor, like, if we had a house, we just host everybody here. We just host everybody here and build and make stuff in their attic or basement or garage or whatever.
Speaking of that, back on the topic, I want to bring up, so when you are building sets, a lot of these sets are used in like sitcoms, like Seinfeld and Family Matters, and Sister, and those sitcoms. But if you notice, like a lot of the sets kind of like copy themselves, like especially the family ones, the family oriented ones.
Yeah.
It's always a living room, a kitchen, and bedrooms. Yeah.
Where it leads into the living room leads into the kitchen. But really,
Or that one diner that everyone goes to.
What really upsets me is that specifically in the family ones, like Family Matters, Sister, and it was like a step by step. You go into you walk in the front door, the living room is there, and then there's the set of stairs that goes upstairs, right? Then you go to the kitchen, and there's another set of stairs that goes upstairs. Just like I've never been in a house where there's 2 sets of stairs. I've never ever been in.
I have. There are some houses that like the kitchen has a set of stairs and the living room has a set of stairs. So like you can go upstairs 2 ways.
That must be an enormous house with a lot of rooms.
Not really. Like I see like 300. Well, now it's 300,000. Back in the day, it was like $200,000 homes that had it. I really just think it's the layout. It's not as popular of a layout now as it used to be back in the 90s. I think layouts change a lot over the years as well.
Yeah, so that's where I'm getting at. So you have to keep in mind, like when you're building these sets, does the set match whatever exterior you're going to be getting? Because I know big Family Matters, their house or Full House, that the inside looked nothing like that.
It really did not. I was like, you're telling me that place has a basement? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's like San Francisco.
I mean, but that's a hard argument. When I'm looking at the house and I'm like, there's no way they could put stairs there because there's a window over there. So that's something you got to think about. Like, if I put the window here, am I like contradicting the exterior? Or if I do
and there's way too many rooms for that small of a San Francisco. Yeah. I mean, San Francisco real estate was expensive in the 90s. I can't
Yeah, but that is a good point to make. But you have to always keep in mind the layout that you're using, and does this make sense to the look of what you said is the outside of that house? Since you're, it's obviously a different spot, a different location.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to say is I already kind of touched on it, but the jacks in the back, that's what those are. They're called jacks, and you put them on the back of the wall, and you put the like a flat board going away from the wall, and then you put the jack onto both parts so that it holds it steady. There's a few different ways to do jacks, but the most common is, I believe, this one where it's leaning backward, and then there's the flat piece going out, and it attaches to the bottom of that. And that just holds that wall up so that it doesn't fall flat. So actually, Brian, have you ever done any construction with have you ever built a set or built any of this stuff?
I haven't. Well, in film school, we did something similar. Like they had like these walls with a brick texture in there, and like we would constantly use it. But like film school is just a different beast, and like you get tired of the same walls, and then when you're looking at everybody else's project that uses the same walls, you get nauseous and stuff like that. But my father does carpentry on the side, and he like builds houses and stuff. So I know I'm no like none of that stuff rubbed up on me, but that's why I was getting about the carpentry work and stuff like that, because you can run into a lot of trouble because if you build these walls and like you don't build them right. I know you have to have like a carpentry license or something like that to be a licensed builder to build certain things. I'm not necessarily sure how that works on a film set, but you build a wall and it falls on somebody, you can get sued. Like if it wasn't like, oh well, you didn't build it. Like you have.
Another thing though is that these walls are surprisingly light, is what I've heard. They get like a specific type of wood that's
right,
lighter,
but I
so
do
that
agree.
you can move
Like
it
you
around.
have to be safe.
But
like,
yeah,
safety first, always, no matter what.
always,
so.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. But always.
And that is actually a good thing to point out as well, is that it might have some law against it, especially depending on what area you're in. There might be laws against you just doing it yourself.
So that Alec Baldwin, the shooting that happened.
Don't get me started on that.
Guns on that, you have to have licensed firearm trainees there and stuff like. So that's what's going on right now with that whole legal debate right now. They're trying to.
No, I really hope they do, because I feel like I've been telling Coda this. I think that was important all along. We have people who are stunt coordinators and who are there to like make sure that that's secure. Why don't we have people there to make sure that like even blank rounds can hurt you, Like I feel like there should be someone for that.
But I feel like it's the same principle with these sets. So like, if something happens and a part of the set falls on somebody, they're going to go to the person who built the set. Well, what is your license? Like, do you have a license? Or you're not even licensed to build a set. How do we know you built it right? And you have blueprints here, and I'm pretty sure
someone who knows what they're doing as far as props work. For example, we've seen people who they were doing their short films and they got an actual guy who specializes in props to build a door. This was a film ride actually. They got a guy who specializes in props to build the door, because that door would need to stay up in a place, and they didn't want it falling on the very expensive actress. So they actually built the door, and it looked amazing, and it looked so good, and like a real genuine heavy door. But they had a specialist do that. So I'm sure, I don't know how hard it would be to find someone who specializes in props to build something for you, because that is something that I kind of have a harder time finding, but I'm sure in like Production Hub and stuff like that, I'm sure I'd be able to find it if I really look. But maybe check out how much that would cost. Like, hey, you're a carpenter or you work with props and stuff like that. How much would it cost for you to build me this wall or this door? And maybe negotiate,
I mean,
I would say if you're just trying to like get a sense of how it's done, be safe with it and just like kind of create something just to see how it looks and how it works without actually like
a
using it on
smaller,
something.
like on a smaller scale, like something smaller.
Like just on a thing for yourself, on just a practice video or a practice film or whatever, where you're just kind of alone, or you're just looking at how you could do a scene and you're just setting up a small room. Now, if you're trying to do something complex or something crazy, obviously you're not going to do something like this, but I was just going to do Inception as the crazy, exaggerated
Yeah.
if you're trying to do something like that where it's, you know, spinning around and it has all these crazy things and it's really just a board that's spinning around on this on this actual constructed set, then obviously you can't just do that. But if it's just like 3 walls or a wall or 2 and you're just making like a corner, I think it can be done. You just need to make sure, like Brian was saying, just pay attention,
Practice.
be safe, and just know that it does also add that possibility of it falling on you, of the, like, if it does fall, if it does hurt somebody, of that, you can be sued or you're having something happen to you. Even though there's only 2 walls here that the people built, if they fell on the actor that sits in that chair, you know, that's not good, and then that actor could maybe sue them, like Brian was saying, because maybe they don't have an actual degree in carpentry, and so they.
But on the other hand, there are people that practice fully and they get better and build stuff. So if it's something simple, you might practice a little bit more, might research, do some work on it if you want to try it. But always safety, always making sure that when you're moving it, there's multiple people to help you and there's nothing behind you to where, like, if it falls, it would hit anybody. Like, having basic safety precautions is always
Well,
important.
And also just looking up the laws around your area, and if that is,
Definitely.
and if it isn't illegal to make your own wall or in your house, in your neighborhood, if that's something like Brian said, if that's going to be considered another room, or how it's.
But
gonna
if you
be
have a
considered.
little bit of a higher budget, I would, or if you want to just check it out, like see how much it would cost, I wouldn't be opposed to asking somebody who works like building wooden things and stuff
Also,
like
I would
that.
consider like local theaters and stuff like that. They're going to know people that work with them to make those kinds of sets.
Oh yeah,
that
definitely.
Probably do it cheap, or maybe students, projects, students working in the workshops and stuff in like different construction schools and in filmmaking school even. So
Props, yeah, they work with props in theater and stuff.
props and set construction of walls like this. So
Mhm.
those are other things that you can consider as well.
I think Peerspace had some kind of listing for it. I know they have a lot of photography studios. Have a lot of
Peerspace?
Peerspace has. I think Peerspace has some kind of. The last time I checked and looked on there, there was something on there. I'm not necessarily sure if it was like a production studio or whatnot, but something there they'll rent their space for you to use as well.
Oh, that's
but
awesome.
on that note, that's as far as like the build, definitely like if, like I said, none of this I'm saying is to deter you from doing any of this stuff. Like, if you're worried about a wall falling on somebody, like, don't just. I mean, it could happen, but I'm just bringing it up.
Well,
Definitely,
could a
do,
million
I mean,
things.
yeah,
You
it
could
could
trip on
happen
a
even if
wire,
you
you
hire
could-
somebody. So like that's just
Yeah.
something to always keep in mind.
if you want to try, if you have your heart set out on it, go for it. But it is good to have a little bit of knowledge of some kind of carpentry. Not necessarily saying that you have to be able to build houses or anything like that, but just to keep yourself safe on the post production. Let's say, like, I've seen movies get criticized for like they had a sink, there was an outlet on the bottom, but then there was a sink, and there's no, and you know, everybody was like, there's no way you can put a water system right next to an electrical system and stuff like that. So that, like,
Yeah, no, what the heck?
no, like, if you have no idea about carpentry or any of that stuff, like, you may find yourself putting a water pipe right next to an electric line, which is a big no-no. You know,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
as for that in your film, like, this, everybody would just be, you know, looking at the huge fire hazard in the background, like, that's the only thing people notice.
Oh,
like,
that's actually another thing I wanted to bring up. One of the videos even had it where they were like looking at part of the wall and they were like, holy crap, good thing we caught this. It was kind of they left a light super close to the wall, and it was the halogen light, so it was very hot, and it started to make the wall turn black, and it could have caught fire.
And it was
but they
starting to
caught it.
dent it, wasn't it?
They said it was starting to smoke and like kind of dented in, but it was like starting to turn black. So it could have caught on fire. And so that is also something to keep in mind if you're on a professional production set. The lights don't, like, if they're not LEDs, usually LEDs are fine, but even those can sometimes get hot depending on the voltage and everything.
And if it hits the wall, and if it hits that wall, it could break, and the gas and all that stuff, and the explosion and the death. No, don't put it near lights, please. I got so paranoid.
Well, I
after
mean,
watched
like
those
there's a
Vine
light
videos.
next to the wall now, this lamp, but like for
No,
the
I know, but you
production
know what I
light-
mean. Like not super duper. Yeah.
Yeah,
like
like
right
production
above
lights and
it
stuff
to
like
where
that. Just be safe, even if you're in a real location. If you have a hot light, especially if you're using something like tungsten lights, just keep them in a space where it's not too close to anything that can catch on fire, because that can happen, and that has happened in the past with other people, and it's a big warning sign to everybody to like make sure they don't have it too close. If you're reflecting off of a wall, for instance, the light, and you're putting the light too close, it's going to catch fire eventually, and all these other things. So you want to just be safe and be careful with that as well. Since Brian was talking about safety and I think he talked about fire hazard, that just came to my mind. Brian, did you have anything else you were saying? Did I cut you off?
Oh, no, that was it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's everything for the set building. Mainly we were just looking into like building those walls, and I just wanted to kind of see how it worked. I would like to try it out at some point, but I would like to wait until I have like a space dedicated to it and everything, because right now we're in an apartment and that's kind of impossible to start building walls. But it is a good thing. It does give you some versatility, and it does give you some flexibility if you're creating something. So you can move those walls around. You can make just a corner if that's all you need, or you can make 3 walls and then you have a room from one side. But like Brian was saying, you do want to also keep in mind how that layout is, what kind of house you're going to make it look like for the outside. Also, the design of the outside. If it's too contrasted to how it looks, it might be weird and off-putting. Like if it's an old Victorian looking house on the outside, but then the inside just looks like a modern day house, that'll be very
Like super modern, because there are Victorian houses that look more modern on the inside, but
right, but the layout is still very unique. And so if it's just like a 3-room wall, like it's gonna look a little bit less Victorian and a little more just like a set or like a modern day house, and it's gonna be a little more off-putting, I guess, or it's gonna be just something that might be like in the back of their head and they don't even notice why, but subconsciously they feel like something's wrong here. So that is something to keep in mind as well. But also just, safety is the biggest thing when it comes to anything. Safety with these walls, safety with yourself, so you're not cutting off a finger or just making yourself bleed or anything. And you also just want to be safe and with the wall itself, with the wood, make sure you're paying attention to how the length and the width need to be so that you can mark it and cut it exactly right. Because if you cut it too short, it's going to be, you can't go back and like put it back on. So then all of a sudden you're going to waste a whole piece of wood. So you want to just be safe with all that stuff and just be prepared.
And safety with others, because like you have to think about what their job is, what risks they could be taking on the set as well, and make sure that it's as safe of an environment as possible.
Yep, that's it. So on Wednesday, we're going to be watching The Disaster Artist for whoever wants to come and watch that. We watched The Room last week.
It was so painful. So
last Wednesday we watched The Room and it was awful. And now we're going to watch The Disaster Artist this Wednesday. If anyone's interested in that.
There was stuff. After finishing it, there was still a huge list of stuff. I was like, wait, but this and this and that, and oh my gosh, this. It was like I couldn't sleep. I kept remembering stuff, and I was like, God, there's also this. And
so the last thing for Thursday, we're going to be going over those 2 exercises that we have. The lighting exercise where we're trying to mimic a shot from Blade Runner 2049, and then the Foley exercise where we are taking a piece of footage and putting our own Foley sound effects over it. So those are our 2 exercises we're watching on Thursday. And we're also going to be talking about what decibel level for your final master. We've already kind of gone over that. So if there's nothing new, I might just skip it because, it does depend on what distributor you're trying to get and all those kinds of things. But just in general, I'm trying to see like if they give us some new information, and I'll bring it up in the next meeting. And that's it. So yeah, just everybody keep in mind if you're interested in coming to the movie, or if you want to take part in those exercises, those are going to be on Thursday and the movie's going to be on Wednesday.
So for those of you that don't know, The Disaster Artist is based on the book of the guy that did The Room with Tommy Wiseau, whatever. And basically talking about the production and the failure of it. And I am so darn curious to watch it. Like the entire time I was like, why and what? And it just so many questions. I want to see if any of them get answered. Also, for those of you that don't know, he made more things after that, including a TV show. You're welcome. Have fun with that. Because that was a rabbit hole. Oh, and he has merch. There's also that. There's a merch shop. It was interesting, to say the least.
The last thing I want to bring up is just that after Thursday, we have 1 week left, and all we're doing on those weeks is we are going to do fill in the blanks like we did last semester. We're going to have some questionnaire things and just have everybody fill them out, and then go over those and just talk about like the semester overall in general. And then on next Thursday, we're going to be doing the quiz and talking about the next semester, as well as giving out the LCloud awards to the 3 who were the most punctual, most communicative, and most active in the group.
For those of you that forgot about that, also letting those of you that are listening to this, the ones that didn't come to the last few meetings, y'all lost the award. Just let you know. I don't know. We'll see if we reconsider.
I have it all written down, who's most punctual and all that. So, and who's most active and communicative.
Arden doesn't count because she's out of on vacation. But everyone else, Arden doesn't count because she's on vacation.
Yeah, I'm just gonna tally up whoever was the most active and most punctual, and then I've been keeping track of it, and we'll be doing that. But that's next Thursday. But I just wanted to bring.
We'll pay you guys. Look at how great we are. We're paying you guys to learn with us. Isn't that amazing? Or we must be so unbearable that we have to pay you to do it, to stick around.
No, we just want everyone to be more professional with us because it's made it easier on us. But it also helps you guys to.
It was just a joke. We do it for those of you that are new and listening as well. We do it. So far, we've done it the past few semesters as a way to thank everybody for their dedication, for their, just learning alongside us, their contribution. Of like teaching us stuff as well and communicating and asking questions, and just to let you guys know we appreciate it. And it's an incentive to do more exercises and stuff like that.
Yep. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to stop the video here.